い全国大会目指して頑張ってみたいかあの若い頃の気持ちを取り戻せたら良いのにもしよろしければ行きましょうか願いが叶う街にその時間楽しい年に行くもしかして知ってるのやのととすがり出会うやなものって答えそうかもしれない知りて素晴らしいものそれは救いの神道だ我々の忘れをいてこれは愛の告白願って忘れましょう成長の苦悩世界を恋になり風の合う顔を叫んで気合い入れよう恋の願うの今日の今日のベケーション今日
Hello and welcome to Japanimation Station's Kyoto Vacation, an anime podcast brought to you by the folks at the Weekly Stuff Podcast. I'm Sean Chapman.
And I'm Jonathan Lack.
And we are here to kick back, relax, and talk about some anime. This week on the show, we continue part 5 of our Kyoto Vacation, Kyoto Animation's Splendid Isolation, by watching a very peculiar, but I think very delightful show, Myriad Colors Phantom World, a show that's, in my opinion, is far better than its reputation sort of implies, but also a show that's very quirky and a bit different than a lot of other stuff we've watched so far, but I think will also fit into our conversations we've been having about the differences between serialized, episodic storytelling, what is the push and pull there, because I think this show is really interesting, but it never really landed with its audience. Jonathan, what do you think?
I like this show. At times, I like this show an awful lot. I don't think it is ever a great show in the way some of the shows we've watched from Kyoto Animation are. I think if you line up everything Ishihara Tatsuya has ever directed, which is a very high bar of material, this is on the lower end. This is more towards Kanon. But I would put it above Kanon. I think it is better at executing on its ambitions, although those ambitions are probably a little lower. I think it has a great first episode. I think it then has a couple of episodes that I think struggle to quite nail what it's going for in terms of tone, pace, things like that. And then I think starting around episode 6, which is the Care Bears episode, basically, I think it's kind of just banger after banger until the end of the season. I think the last half of this season, or a little more than half, like 6 to 13, plus an outstanding OVA, like, every premise is very creative. I think they get a lot of mileage out of them. Some of the episodes are just outstanding. The 8th episode with the monkeys and the onsen is just, if you like to laugh, I don't know why you would not love that episode. I think it even gets into some, like, better character material than I thought the show was capable of at the beginning near the end. And I think it even transitions into having a 2-part finale that effectively feels like the end of a season where we've really gone on a journey with these characters. I think it does that pretty well. Honestly, I think one of the biggest strikes against it is that by the end of the season, I thought it was in such a good place. And it doesn't end on a cliffhanger or anything, but it does end in a way that feels like, all right, now we go to season 2 and we see what they can really do with this show. And there is no season 2 because it was a flop. I feel like this show was building towards a potentially great second run of episodes because it is going for something so weird and unique, because it's not quite comedy anarchy of Nichijou, but neither is it heavily serialized, phantom fighting stories like Beyond the Boundary. And I think it kind of figures out its balance by the end. And I was kind of going, oh, fuck, I'm sad there's not more of this. I wanted to watch more of it.
Yeah, I think my opinions lined up exactly with yours, where this is certainly not one of the masterpiece shows. Like, I would not put it next to Hyoka or Haruhi or Nichijou or K-On! Or, Clannad or any of the, like, mini masterpiece all-time great anime ever made. But if you're looking at it towards, like, some of the weaker shows we've watched that aren't Beyond the Boundary, which is still the only one that I think is more or less in the bad camp, and the sort of an overall estimation. But you put this next to Kanon, I'd put this next to Chuunibyo Season 2, and it's like it fits comfortably in that general camp, where it's like not a masterpiece, but it's still a very good show. It's got a couple of issues here and there, but the things it does well so more than make up for the couple of kind of flaws it has. And it is a thing where I remember liking the show when I first watched it. It's not a show that's stuck with me in a huge way, which I don't think it needs to be. Not every TV show needs to be life-changing. But it's one that sometime after I saw it was when I learned that people did not like the show. Like in general, I think it's in, like, if you look at like fan aggregate rating sites, My Anime List, Analyst, those kind of websites, which I hate those websites, but they are things that tell you the general, they don't tell you the quality of a show, because if they told you the quality of the show, Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood wouldn't be rated the greatest anime of all time, and Reconquista in G wouldn't be in like the lower tier with the garbage shows, right? So they're not telling you the quality, but they do give you an indication of what the general reception is. And this show is very low. It's in like the 6 out of 10-ish area, which these are graded on like video game review scales. So anything that's below a 7 might as well be like garbage trash fire to the people who rated it that way.
And that's ridiculous. This show is this is so much more creative and vibrant and well made and funny than a 6 out of 10. It is not a 6 out of 10. That's ridiculous.
Yes. And so sometime after watching it, I sort of learned to have people had that opinion. I was like, that's weird. Because I remember thinking it's just like not like the greatest show ever made or anything, but I remember being like, yeah, that show was cool. And so it's one I wanted to rewatch. I initially did not put it in our initial load of episodes because it's not an essential KyoAni show, you know? So if you're looking at shows to cut, this is a very easy show to cut from the list of shows to watch for a KyoAni podcast. But when we decided, fuck it, we're just going to throw a million more episodes onto this podcast season, I was happy to put this back in because I did really want to watch it again and see, was I being overly generous when I first watched this show? Was the criticisms accurate? And I feel like, no, this show is very good. It's not amazing, but it is an interesting show to look at relative to the conversation that happens a lot in modern TV, and especially in modern anime, which is the episodic storytelling versus serialized storytelling. Because the number one criticism by far that's leveled towards this show, if you read the reviews and impressions and stuff, is just that it is not a serialized TV show, that it does not have much of anything in terms of an overarching plot line. It has very little in terms of clear character growth, kind of character arcs that are like very, distinct. It's got some of that stuff, but it's not doing a lot with it because that's just not the kind of show it is. And there's just this trend of looking at shows that are narratively like this and just saying that they are bad because they're episode by episode, effectively Monster of the Week shows. And it's frustrating to see people just sort of dismiss a show that's so good at doing what it wants to do, like Myriad Colors Phantom World, purely because it's not your serialized, action narrative thing of where every episode ends with a cliffhanger and you just sort of watch 1,000 episodes in a row because you can't put it down. There's something nice about addictive shows like that do that kind of thing. There's also something nice about a show where I can watch one episode in a sitting and feel like, man, that was really funny and good and I had a good time. I feel like I spent time with some fun characters and learned a little bit about the world and the characters and all that, and then I can put it away and watch a new episode tomorrow. And that's very much what Myriad Colors Phantom World is, and I think it's quite good at doing that. So I'm very happy to be able to do this show on this podcast and kind of, if there are people who disagree with us and don't like this show, maybe they can see the perspective of why these shows are structured this way and what is good about it and what does it do really well for the kind of show it's trying to be.
There is no more useless or brain dead kind of criticism from professional critics or just people on the internet than, oh, this show isn't the thing I expected it to be, or this show isn't the kind of show I like, or this show isn't the thing I wanted, therefore it is bad. That's stupid. That's just stupid criticism. Review the actual show. If your complaint is this isn't serialized enough, I don't know what to tell you. That's like reading a comic book and going, there are too many pictures in this. Why are there not more words? It is what it is. Like, I honestly was delighted with this show from the word go because when we reviewed Beyond the Boundary, you have that 6th episode of that show, which is the one where they fight the stinky phantom thing, right? I don't remember what they're called in that. The Yomu. Yeah, they called...
Yes.
Yeah, they fight the stinky Yomu, and it's not an episode of Beyond the Boundary, and it's an episode of a different show. and it was delightful, and I went, I want that show. I want that show where it is episodic and they're fighting silly monsters every week. Turns out that was the pilot of Myriad Colors Phantom World. Like, that is 100% an episode of, like, to the degree where I'm almost sad they didn't just retake that episode, reanimate the characters, and put it into this series so that you could have it in a good show. Because it doesn't belong in Beyond the Boundary, but it is completely of a piece. Like, I think the one that's most like it in Myriad Colors is the monkey episode with the onsen. That is 100% the same kind of thing as that Beyond the Boundary episode. So for me, it's exactly what I was kind of wanting and looking for. And if anything, I think there's times when I think this show probably goes too hard on having characters and continuity is one of my complaints in some spots. I think near the end it does it better. Like, I think of all the character-centric episodes, by far the best one is the one about our main character Haruhiko near the very end where he turns into a child. I think some of the other ones where they try to go for tugging on the heartstrings, I don't care about as much. But yeah, like, I think this is, though, a weird show to be a one-core 13-episode series.
Yes.
Like, that is one of the things that has caused people, I think, to have this serialization brain rot, frankly, is that when you only have 13 episodes, you expect something more of a unit, and not every anime should or can be that, but a lot of them get pushed in that direction. I think it's one of the many, many reasons why it took TMS a long time to decide what to do with Lupin the Third, for instance, in the 2000s, because that was a kind of show that would run every week for a year or years on end, and that's the kind of show it is, and it doesn't make as much sense today, so there had to be some creativity in how to do it. This is the kind of show that, like, in another lifetime would be more like Ranma 1/2-esque, and there would be 100 episodes of it, and they would probably be a little more hit or miss, but it would make more sense in that format. It doesn't make as much sense in the modern anime landscape, but that doesn't make it a lesser show.
Yeah, it definitely feels structurally like it's a throwback, because when you have really heavily episodic late-night anime, they tend to be something like a Nichijou that is less episodic and more skit-based. Like a gag anime obviously is just going to be, here's a bunch of like little skits all kind of thrown together. Whereas this is more like your Urusei Yatsura, Ranma 1/2, Doraemon. I mean, even like, the Pokemon anime is like this. It's this sort of action comedy. Each episode has like a very distinctive plot that is like a blend of a little bit of character drama, some good action scenes, and then it's a lot of like little comedy bits. And it's, such a particular kind of show that used to be sort of like the dominant thing of what animation was, both in Japan and over here, because that's also the model that most Western animation is based in, are these little like kind of action comedy little gag shows. Even something like SpongeBob SquarePants, you don't think of as an action show, but it kind of is. It's just incredibly cartoonish action, or Looney Tunes and all that kind of stuff. And this very much fits into that overall sort of genre. But yes, the thing is that the place that it airs in and the structure of like the economics of the show like this for 2016 is so different for anime. And so it is kind of understandable why people would have preconceived notions about what the show is going to be coming into it. Because on the surface, it looks like a lot of other kind of Battle Academy shows you get every single season with a little bit of like a harem romance element there and all that kind of stuff. It sort of looks like it on the tin. From what I can understand, the light novel basically is one of those. But that's actually not what this anime is in any way, shape, or form. And by the end of the first episode, I think it's very clear, that's not really what the show is going for. And by the time you get to the end, I'm very glad that they made it this, rather than making it High School DD or like any of the kinds of, there's hundreds of those shows that came out exactly at this time. And to me, Myriad Colors Phantom World, in retrospect, is honestly a better show than I even felt it was at the time, because it's kind of a fresh breath air amongst its peers.
Yeah, I think this is one to talk about in relation to Beyond the Boundary, even though they're very different shows, because I think Beyond the Boundary was KyoAni trying to play in like someone else's wheelhouse in, I think, a genre that doesn't really play to their strengths, and I think not quite grasping it. And I think this one, whatever the light novel is, Tatsuya Ishihara turned it into a Tatsuya Ishihara show. Like, this is absolutely of a piece. It's not on the level of a Haruhi or a Clannad or any of those, obviously, and it is not aspiring to be as serious or heady as some of those, but like when every episode opens with our main character giving this in-depth lecture on some kind of either real science or history or pseudoscience, yeah, this is the guy who made the Melancholy of Suzumiya Haruhi, very obviously. When you have the ridiculous, like, big fights and skits, this is the people who made Nichijou. And I think it's of a piece with all of those in a very real way. And then also, of course, it is as beautifully and wonderfully illustrated and designed as anything else we've seen. I think the other thing propping up this show we have to get into later is it's got a fucking killer voice cast. It has it was on the cutting edge of basically the current gen of voice actors, just like everyone who's in this show either was already or was going to be a massive star. And so it's really fun to hear them all here because it's such a good cast.
Yeah, because it is a show that does not feel as ambitious as a lot of other KyoAni shows, but it is a show that feels like they're having so much fun making it, you know?
Yes.
Like, it doesn't feel like this is some sort of, like, incredible passion project from everyone involved, the way that some of the KyoAni shows clearly are that. This more feels like hey, let's get the gang together, let's make, like, a fun thing and just have a good time with it. And so it's not trying to sort of be this super cutting-edge, crazy show. It just feels like the show that everyone wanted to just have a fun time with, and that makes it fun to watch. And yes, and the voice acting, all that stuff, the animation, all that is phenomenal as well. Like, the whole production is just incredibly confident, as you'd expect from Ishihara show, because he's been good. He's been doing these shows for a long time at this point. We're in 2016, so it's been over 10 years since he started directing. He has made a shit ton of shows at this point, and he's gotten very, 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 very good at it.
Yeah, it's crazy. So yeah, let's hear about the history of this show, Sean. I'm curious about it.
All right, so there's not a huge amount of history, but there are a few good little tidbits I managed to find here. So, you know, if we're kind of picking up where we're leaving off with our competitions, because this is another light novel KyoAni competition adaptation. So there was a bum year in 2012 where there was no shows selected, basically. So the third KyoAni competition, nothing won the encouragement award or honorable mentions, however you want to translate that award. But then there were 3 light novels selected for the fourth competition, which was in 2013. And one of those novels was Myriad Colors Phantom World, or Musaigen no Phantom World, if you want the Japanese title. So Myriad Colors Phantom World was written by an author with the pen name of Hatano Suichiro, and the only novels released by this author were the 3 Phantom World books. But when I was doing my research, it became clear that, like, this dude is someone who's written other light novels, and for whatever kind of contractual reasons, maybe with like a publishing company or something, he is using a different pen name for these. But it's like very clear, and everybody knows this is a person who has written other light novels. It's just this pen name is just used for the Myriad Colors Phantom World books. The first volume of Phantom World was published by Keismo Bunko in December 2013, with 2 additional volumes published by 2016, and the anime adaptation began airing from January to March 2016. So like all the other ones of these adaptations, this is based loosely, very loosely, extremely loosely on only the first light novel. And I like how, like, each time they've done this, based on what I've read, it just seems like they're getting looser and looser and looser, to the point where this, like, seems to have very little real connection to the light novel, right? Because when you look at Chuunibyo, Love Chuunibyo and Other Delusions Season 1, that clearly, you know, there's a lot of new stuff, they added new characters, all that kind of stuff. But the overarching plot, if you read the synopsis of the book, you watch the show, the overarching plot is very similar. Then you get to Beyond the Boundary, and it's like, okay, like, yeah, there are some similarities, but now you're really kind of going in a different direction. Season 2 of Love Chuunibyo and Other Delusions is they took a single character, and that was it, and mostly just her design and kind of a general idea of the character. And this is like, some characters are pulled from the book. And then, like, some of the finale 2 episodes, some of those ideas are loosely based on something from the light novel, based on what I've read, but almost all of it is totally different. So some changes, again, I have not actually read the book. This is just me reading other people's impressions and kind of compiling them together. It seems like the one huge change is just the overall tone of the TV show is way more comedic, and that the light novels are a lot more serious. In the light novels, there's a lot more stuff about all the Alayashiki company and the experiments they do, all that stuff that you learn in the last 2, or like really the finale of the season. There's a lot more of that kind of stuff. Haruhiko, the main character, is the result of an experiment himself, and his powers are artificially induced, and apparently his powers are way more crazy and like reality altering and like next level crazy nonsense. There is a character that's not exactly Enigma from the show, but is a similar character named Rupa, and that character is a literal manifestation of Haruhiko's Oedipal complex that is summoned through his powers. So that little bit of like Freudian stuff you get in the last couple of episodes, that's in the light novels, but it seems like it is a much bigger part of the light novels. And then when I read a thread on myanimelist.com where someone was listing out what happens in volumes 2 and 3, and particularly volume 2, immediately I was like, what the fuck is even happening? Because apparently in volume 2, most of it takes place in a parallel universe because God is a phantom. Like the Judeo-Christian God is a phantom, and he like wipes out 2/3 of humanity to like test Haruhiko, and Haruhiko becomes a super like edgelord protagonist, and it's just, long story short, the show has very little resemblance to anything I've read from what the light novels are, which seem very edgy, seem much more sort of erotic in terms of what they're doing. There's like more harem romance kind of stuff in there, and so KyoAni really took just the barest kernel, it seems to me, and kind of made their show off of it. There are also a bunch of characters, as we kind of come to expect from these shows, that are original to the anime. The biggest ones being Lulu and Kurumi, which are original to the anime. From what I understand, Volume 2 introduces a character that's vaguely Lulu-esque, but also not really. But she seems like a totally real invention of the show, which is crazy to me because she's like so fundamental to Myriad Colors Phantom World. I kind of can't imagine the show without Lulu in it.
She's part of the logo, the title treatment of the show, which is super creative. She is part of the last kanji. She's like the straight line radical on the last kanji is her. And in the theme song, she like flies into position. If you had like asked me, of all the characters, which ones were invented for the show, I would have answered almost everyone else before getting to Lulu. That's crazy to me. Yeah, and we're romanizing it the correct way if people are wondering the subtitles. And I assume the English dub, because they're weird like this, just call her Ruru. It's clearly L's.
Yes, it's supposed to be Lulu. So one other thing this show attracted a bunch of attention for that's really not as big a part of the show as like I think some of the like initial trailers and the reaction and then the end of episode 1 indicates. But the show has more what we call ecchi elements, or like sexual elements, right? Fan service, that kind of thing. Which obviously has not been a big part of KyoAni's stuff up to this point. You get a little bit of it here and there, but certainly compared to your average late night anime, high school romance kind of shows, you get a lot more of that kind of stuff in there. And so there was an interview with Ishihara, the director, after episode 1 aired that has this sort of like incredible, ridiculous scene at the end that involves the most detailed animation of breasts bouncing like in the history of the fucking medium. And we'll talk about it when we talk about episode 1. But they asked him some questions about the limbo dance scene, and I pulled some quotes and translated them from this interview because I love this. So he just gives a bunch of like, the website didn't give you like the full interview straight for straight. It just gave you like little snippets of it. So these are like the quotes I pulled out from it. So Ishihara said a few things here. One, I like comedy more than serious drama. It might be that comedy is more Ishihara-y, which I saw that quote, and I'm like, I'm sure Jonathan's gonna like and agree with that because that is like, it is. He's a very much a comedy guy.
Except it's totally true, except that his directorial debut is Air. One of his most famous shows ever is Clannad. Both of these shows have significant comedy elements, obviously. I think it's very true, but like it is funny when you think about the overall scope of his work. I think a lot of people would have to think for a second before realizing, no, all of his stuff actually does have significant comedy elements, even the darkest stuff. But it's very true.
Yes, but it's clear that that's kind of like the way he looks at himself as a person is like he's more of a comedy guy than a drama guy, which makes a lot of sense. Some other quotes here. Boys in puberty are controlled left and right by sexual things. Myriad Colors Phantom World has its erotic elements emphasized like the manga and magazines such as Young Jump, which middle and high school boys read. So that's part of like, I think the DNA of the show, and this honestly like harkens to things like Takashi Yumiko's stuff like Ranma One Half and Urusei Yatsura. Like they all have these kinds of fan servicey erotic elements that are played for comedy, and that's very much like an intentional element of Myriad Colors Phantom World. And you see it here with he's like referencing different kinds of series from these different like more sort of erotic, like slightly erotic, right? Obviously, it's not like hugely erotic. It just has direct sexual elements in there from some of those manga magazines. The limbo dance scene is a scene that even kindergartners might laugh at. Maybe these sorts of ridiculous scenes don't have much meaning, but I think that laughing at such things is the purpose of having intelligence, which I fucking loved that line also.
I mean, honestly, the end of episode 1, and I think that's completely true, it's one of like, I think if you were trying to define Ishihara Tatsuya and his style through a couple of scenes, that would be one of the scenes on the reel.
Yeah.
Because what makes that scene work so well is it's not sexual. I don't know how anyone could watch that scene and be aroused by it. It's really weird. It is very much a kindergartner sense of humor of this lady has giant boobs and they're bouncing as she's trying to do an impossible limbo move. That's fucking funny. And it is funny. The human body is funny. And it's like, it's very pure to me in that scene. It's like very innocent. I think that quote like unlocked to me why that scene works so well. It 100% is. You could show it to little kids and they would find it very funny.
Yes. And then I found this last quote was very interesting. It kind of connects to some of what we were talking at the top of the show. So he was asked about how the series Myriad Color Phantom World can compete in a market with so many school battle shows. Because again, this is like around the time where I feel like these shows are starting to leave, but you're still getting a shit ton of them in 2016. He said, "Perhaps we haven't found a way to present things differently to other works. The things that an audience can be interested in are limited. I enjoy moe, so I'm always thinking about how to find a new kind of moe." And I think there was something in the way he worded this quote to me that made it feel like he kind of knew that this show was not going to be a huge hit. That there's just this sense of like not really knowing how to make these shows and appeal to this newer generation of anime fans and what they're kind of looking for. And so he's taken like some of these little bits and pieces, he's made it slightly more like vaguely erotic or whatever with like the comedy and Mai and her large breasts and all that stuff, but he's still playing it the way he would play the comedy in any of his other series. And I think this like sense of like what moe is has kind of like evolved, and it's different than the kind of moe that KyoAni helped create with shows like Haruhi and Lucky Star and K-On! And this sense that like KyoAni is no longer the kind of like leading figure that everyone else is following. It's more like KyoAni and this is one of the reasons why I labeled this part Splendid Isolation. They are now on an island kind of doing their own thing, while the rest of the anime industry has gone off in kind of a different direction. And I think there's a little bit of a sense of that. And I found it interesting that he would say that after episode 1 aired, kind of saying like, I don't know if people are going to like this show. Like, I don't know if like we've done anything to attract this new audience to this show, because there are so many late night anime now being created by the time you get to 2016. And obviously this is still very true today, that like the audience you're grabbing, you're subdividing so much. It's such a niche thing now because you've got 20, 30 shows airing in this style every like 4 months. And then you get a new batch of them, and you get that different batches 4 times in a year. I mean, it's so much content. There's not enough audience for all of that content. And it kind of feels like this is a little bit of him kind of looking at that and kind of describing that lightly in this sort of interview that aired after episode 1.
Yeah. And, you know, I think I have a similar reaction to this as I did to Nichijou, which is the thought of this airing as a late night anime is just kind of weird to me. This feels more like a Saturday morning cartoon. You know, it feels like it's kind of the wrong... and like the way Nichijou ultimately got a lot of its sort of hit status later on was from a re-airing on basically like a Saturday afternoon or something, right? It was in a different time slot. It feels like this could have been done something similar at some point, but it didn't.
Yeah, and especially with 13 episodes, it would be hard for it to do that, because Nichijou was 2 cores. And then what they did for the live TV version is they just re-edited those into different episodes with the different skits.
Yes.
So one interesting thing is like with this show is KyoAni tried something a little bit different with some of their sort of paratextual promotional elements. So you still have your standard web radio show, which all these shows always have. But they also had a live talk show on their YouTube channel that aired a different episode after each episode of the anime aired. So there's like more kind of promotional stuff on the YouTube channel. Those are all still up if you want to watch them. They're all in Japanese, but it's like the voice actors, and they're just kind of like chatting about stuff and taking viewer questions. There's also a live event where they did one with like a live audience after episode 6 of the show. And other interesting things, like they took the next episode previews that you would normally get, and they just put those on their YouTube channel instead of putting them at the end of the episodes. So like all the next episode stuff still exists. They're just not in the episode itself, which also kind of gives them just a little bit of extra time for each episode. But there's a little bit of a sense of them experimenting a little bit with how to like kind of incorporate the YouTube stuff, because now the year 2016, obviously YouTube is huge. And so there's a little bit of that, and I thought that was interesting. In terms of the sales for the show, Myriad Colors Phantom World is a flop. The first volume sold 2,588 copies, which is less than Nichijou. Now, there's one interesting thing I noticed was on going through some of the sales stuff, is that this specific season of anime, which is winter 2016, was ridiculously low. Like, if you looked at, like, there's a lot of discussion about it at the time, that for whatever reason, just every single show here, or not every single show, but there was nothing that was like an incredible hit, and the overall average level of sales was just very low, and then it jumped back up the winter 2017. But if you look at all the winter seasons up to this point, it's like half the total sales as all the previous seasons. I do not know why that is the case. Is weird. Some of the other stuff that aired around this time was Konosuba, which was the biggest show of that season, which was 12,000 copies, which is obviously a good solid hit, and obviously that series is still very popular now. And then the next highest one was Grimgar of Fantasy and Ash, which is a pretty good isekai style show, and that was only 5,510. So you see how huge that gap is. For whatever reason, everything winter 2016, that was just kind of a fallow season in terms of sales. I don't think Myriad Colors Phantom World would have sold a lot in any other season, but it just was like a weird outlier I noticed when I was looking through some of the data.
Yes. It's also interesting that Konosuba was the most popular one to come out of that season. I can actually see next to Konosuba, Myriad Colors Phantom World, it's not as good a show as that. And I do think it's an interesting, like, Konosuba is a similar brand of madcap comedy, but in a genre that was more up and coming than like on its way out. And that's kind of an interesting contrast to have.
Yeah, it definitely feels like Konosuba is more like grabbing the kind of, that's more like the kind of cutting edge show that's ahead of the curve in terms of where a lot of the trends were going, in terms of isekai stuff, in terms of the comedy style and all of that. Whereas Myriad Colors Phantom World is very kind of traditional in many ways, because that's kind of KyoAni's whole vibe. Because KyoAni's stuff has always been kind of fundamentally traditional. It's just that like they kind of lucked into hitting that exact thing when it needed to happen, of like the moe and all of that stuff. But they're like, their production style and like direction and all that stuff for KyoAni just feels very traditional to me in this great way of like, I feel like when I'm watching my Ultraman shows or I watched, classic Japanese movies, I feel like there's a direct line between those stylistically and KyoAni. And it's kind of interesting to me that it feels like they are this rock. Their style has not really changed all that much when we've been watching 10 years of this stuff. Like you look at Myriad Colors Phantom World and you look at Haruhi, those are very similar shows on the broad sense of it. And it just kind of feels like KyoAni is like, we're sticking with what we know best. Obviously that is not always going to work out the best for them for sales wise, but quality wise, hell yeah. That's what I want. I don't want them to try chasing those like trends and stuff. And luckily they've never done that.
This is the last one we're talking about in this section based on the novel competition. We have one more thing, which is the movie version of Love, Chuunibyo, and Other Delusions next week. But like, it is interesting how much of a mixed bag it's been so far in terms of success for them. I mean, on the one hand, the one thing we have not talked about is Free, which is like the big missing piece of this puzzle, because that's the biggest success they've had out of their novel competition, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's given them this like decade-long franchise. Sound Euphonium is not from that competition, right?
No, it is not.
Yeah. So that's a different thing. Eventually they will get Violet Evergarden, which is probably their biggest critical success out of it. I think we, agree at least the first season of Love, Chuunibyo, and Other Delusions is outstanding. But then like, it's interesting. And it is, the more and more they're changing the stories, the more you do kind of wonder, what's the point of getting the novel rights if then you're just going to write your own original story? I do wonder how the different novelists feel seeing the KyoAni adaptations where they're like, man, they did really good work on this, but they didn't like my story much. It's kind of funny.
Yes, all the post Love Chuunibyo and Other Delusions ones, because again, season 1 of Love Chuunibyo and Other Delusions, that's they added a bunch of stuff, but you have to. You're only adapting one volume of light novel. There's only so much you can do. Right. But the core plot line clearly is still the core plot line from the novel, just with more stuff in there. But yes, all the other ones, it is, you look at it, you're like, it's hard to see the real functionality of this in terms of actually producing really workable IP outside of, obviously, you have those handful of big successes, right? You have Free, you have Violet Evergarden, you have Love Chuunibyo and Other Delusions, but you have these other kind of scattershot shows like Beyond the Boundary and Myriad Colors Phantom World that just are these kind of weird things. But obviously, also they just get to kind of work in this other space of getting to publish these different series and stuff, because another thing with that competition is that not everything that gets published by KAS Mabunko gets turned into an anime.
Right.
So they do publish plenty of other novels also, so it is just kind of part of their overall expanding their base and kind of covering kind of every element of their business. But it is an interesting and kind of strange thing, the ups and downs of this model they've kind of pioneered.
The other shows we haven't talked about that they've done off novels are Tsurune, which just finished its second season. Kobayashi's Dragon Maid was not one of those. That was a different publisher.
Yeah.
And then neither was Amagi Brilliant Park. That's also not the... So yeah, I guess it's just Tsurune is the other one. They announced when it was first published that 20 Seiki Denki Mokukoru would be an anime, but after the fire, it has been unclear whether that's actually getting made. So we don't know the status of that.
Yeah, and I doubt that's going to get made because it's just been so long.
It's been years,
since, yeah. Yeah, and the competition has been on hold basically since the fire. And so I'm curious to see if they ever start it up again. I honestly, at this point, I expect that they're kind of done with this kind of section of the history of KyoAni because of all that stuff.
Yeah. It's an interesting period as we've been tracing it here. So,
yes.
Yeah. So tell us about who worked on this show, Sean.
All right. So, of course, the director, the man we know well, Yoshida Tatsuya, directed the show. Also, another classic KyoAni man coming up to bat for series composition. We have Fumihiko Shimo himself, the man who wrote 100+ episodes of key anime adaptations, is here. He did not write every episode of Myriad Colors Phantom World, which makes sense. I don't think you want this kind of show, you don't want one person to have written every episode because it's such a kind of grab bag thing. So you have additional scripts are by Yoshida Reiko, who of course is our Yamada Naoko collaborator on things like K-On! She did episode 7 and episode 11, and then Yamada Yuka did episode 6, episode 10 in the OVA. And then Yamada Yuka has written for a bunch of other stuff. The other really notable thing in a KyoAni sense is they are the main writer for Kobayashi-san's Maid Dragon. So she will come back and be the main writer for that series as well. But, just a really solid group of writers here for this season. Character design and chief animation director, you have Ikeda Kazumi, who, of course, has been this for a whole host of shows going all the way back to Clannad. The original designs for the characters from the light novel, which, of course, they're still sort of adapting those designs for the light novel for the characters that were from the light novel, is by an artist named Shirabi, who I just noted is the light novel illustrator for the series 86, which I haven't seen, but I really want to watch. I know it's very popular. And then also Ryo no Oshigoto, or the Dragon King's Job. I don't remember how that's translated in English. I just put it as the Japanese title, which that's the shogi show. It's a shogi show. That's all you need to know. So interesting, good character work. In terms of music, the music is by an artist named Effie, capital EFFY. Effie is a composer and keyboardist who mostly works as a songwriter more than a BGM composer, which this is the third time I feel like I've said that, because that's been the case for Love Chuunibyo and Other Delusions was like that. Beyond the Boundary was also like that. So this is a similar thing, because they're all all of KyoAni's musical partners are pulled from a company called Lantis, which if you've watched these shows, you probably have noticed that logo LANTIS come up over and over again. I just find it interesting that it feels like they've gone to this place of pulling more from their J-pop side than their like traditional anime composer side. Effie's written a huge ton of like J-pop songs, and especially songs for different voice actors, and then also a lot of songs for franchises like Idolmaster and Love Live School Idol Project. As every songwriter vaguely anime related must be at this time, because that's just what a fucking industry of songs you have to do to be supporting all the shows and the albums and the games for those franchises. It's like hundreds of J-pop songs you have to make for those things. So anybody is working on this franchise. In terms of episode directors, it's an interesting setup of directors we have this time. So Kigami Yoshiji directs episodes 1 and 9, but does not do storyboards for any episodes. So the storyboards for episode 1 are by Takemoto Yasuhiro, and the storyboards for episode 9 are by Ishihara Tatsuya. Kitanohara Noriyuki did episodes 2 and 8. Fujita Haruka did episodes 3 and 10. Ishidate Taichi did episodes 4 and 11, which those two are in particular really good. I think this is like a good Ishidate Taichi show overall. Kawanami Eisaku did episodes 5, 7, and the OVA. Ogawa Taichi did episode 6, but the storyboards for episode 6, which that's the Kurumi episode, those storyboards are by Yamada Naoko, which is one of those where like you didn't need to tell me that those are Yamada Naoko storyboards, because it's like that's such a Yamada Naoko ass episode. And then Ogawa Taichi, he didn't do storyboards for his directed episodes, but he did the storyboards for the finale, which he did not direct. So they did some swapsies on that. I don't know why. I'm sure there are production reasons why that was more convenient. Yamamura Takiya did Yamamura Takiya did episode 12. Then Takemoto Yasuhiro directed episode 13. But again, the storyboards for that one were Ogawa Taichi. So a little bit more like splitting up of direction and storyboard duties for this one, but a good batch of directors doing a lot of really good episodes here.
Absolutely, and it is just funny to see you have some of their heaviest hitters directing but not storyboarding, and some heavy hitters storyboarding but not directing, including Yamada Naoko and this show's director, Tatsuya Ishihara. So that's kind of funny, but it is a good batch. I think both of those Kigami episodes are fantastic. But everyone says, I agree with you on Ishidate Taichi. He does two of the most effective, like, character-centric ones. I, as always, love the Kitanohara Noriyuki ones. Episode 8 is the monkey one, might be my favorite of the season. So lots of good stuff here. Yeah, very, very good work there. And then might as well just talk about the openings now, because I like the opening and ending, but they're not like amazing to me. So the opening is Naked Dive by Screen Mode, which is a good title. And a fun opening. I like the animation. It's one of those things that makes it seem like it's going to be a more fan servicey kind of pseudo-erotic show than it actually is. Kind of like the OVA is the same way, where you think like, oh, it's going to be one of these OVAs. And you're like, oh, this isn't actually sexy at all. This is just like goofy. But I like how much it's kind of playing with that in the animation for Naked Dive. I agree. I don't really care for the song. I think it's fine. I think it's got some good lyrics. It has the lyric that rhymes Jesus with Venus. Yes. That's very funny. I don't think it's a very good song, so I didn't really care about it. But I like the animation a lot. There's a couple of clips from it in the current Japanimation station opening that you can watch on all these episodes because they're great. Particularly the one where it's Lulu doing like patty cake with the big bear. What's his name? Kurumi's bear. Albrecht, which is just fucking fantastic. I had seen that clip and worked it into our theme song before I'd seen this show, so I knew there was a weird fairy girl and a bear. I didn't think the bear was an actual part of the show. I thought it was a weird thing in the theme song, but no, the bear is a major character in the show, and he rocks. Oh, yeah. Albrecht is the fucking hero of this show. He's wonderful. But I like that. I do like that the opening with both its animation and its music feels like it's a serious battle show opening until the beat comes in, and the first thing you see is Mai's breasts flying upwards to the beat of the music, and then it's like, oh no, this is a silly show, and then the rest of the theme song confirms that. Yes, very silly. And then the ending song is Jinshin Always, or Innocence Always, sung by Tadakoto Azusa, who is the voice actress for Lulu. And that song is composed by Kimu, who is a member of the band Penguin Research, who did Hatina, that really great song that's in Build Divers Re-Rise. And Gundam also, Build Divers, yeah. Yes, Gundam Build Divers Re-Rise. It is just still one of the greatest band names of all time is Penguin Research. Has very little connection to this show, but just has to be stated whenever I see the words Penguin Research. I have just reminded how good that band name is. Absolutely phenomenal. And a good band, too. But their name, extra good.
Yes. And the ending is like fine. Like it doesn't like stand out to me as like a amazing ending. You know, I don't have like a huge impression of it. I like Tadako Asa, I think, is a very good singer. She's in like a whole host of the different kind of idol things like Idolmaster and stuff like that. And I like her. And her voice is very nice, but it's not a song that stood out to me a huge amount.
I agree. I will admit this is probably my least favorite set of theme songs we've had from a KyoAni show. I skipped them quite a bit watching through these.
I never skip.
Okay,
but
that's fine.
Sometimes I look at my phone while I listen to the music.
Sometimes I just, needed to shave off 4 minutes per episode, and that's what I would do, and that's fine. But, not my favorites. That's okay. KyoAni has had at this point God knows how many theme songs we've watched for all the fucking God knows how many shows we've watched. Most of them have been bangers. Wasn't really a fan of either of these, but that's fine. It's okay. I was a fan of the show, and I think we should talk about it.
Japanimation Station.
Thanks for listening to Japanimation Station. If you're enjoying the show, please remember to like and subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and tell your friends.
You can support the show directly on Ko-fi at the link in the description, and remember to check out the Weekly Stuff podcast, our long-running series on movies and video games and everything else on all platforms.
And now, back to the show. So without further ado, let's get into the show. And luckily, this is one where I don't think we have to think too hard about how to tackle it, because it's such an episode by episode show. It's clearly a go through episode by episode. But is there more stuff you want to talk about from an overall perspective before we get into the first episode, Jonathan?
Let's talk about the characters and voice actors really quick, because I do think, again, I think this is one where I can't even begin to imagine watching this one dubbed, because this is, I think this show is 50% carried by how fucking good the voice actors are. As many things as I think this show truly does well, if it didn't have Hiro Shimono and Saori Hayami and these people doing it that well, I don't think it would be as interesting a show. It really relies on, I think, having these actors in the parts.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because, one of the things with this show, partially because it is episodic, it means that, the character development and character arcs are very light. If you compare this to something like Love, Chuunibyo, and Other Delusions, particularly season 1, right, there's a lot of really dramatic character development that happens by the end of that show. Whereas here, at the end, the characters are generally in more or less the same place they were at the beginning, outside of now we're all friends, which is fine. It's such an episodic show. It's like watching The X-Files or something. Mulder and Scully are going to be Mulder and Scully. There's going to be a little bit of adjustment. There's going to be a little bit of evolution. Right. But it's the same with any show like this, your Law and Order, Sherlock Holmes or whatever, any kind of episodic media. It's not about the character development. And that means that you need characters that are very kind of vibrant. And I think the actors are a big part of bringing that out. And so having a big cast is really important. So our lead
the actors, and also before I forget,
yes.
I also just want to say, I think this show has phenomenal character designs. We mentioned the designer earlier. You have both the one for the books, Shirabi, and then you have Ikeda Kazumi, who we've seen a lot from. I think the character designs in this show just are absolutely great. And actually, one thing I would say, Beyond the Boundary is a very well-animated show. I don't think the character designs are that interesting in that show. I think they're very plain. I don't think they capture the imagination much whatsoever. I do think in this show, I just think, the green highlights in Haruhiko's hair, Mai is such a good archetypal version of that character that I feel I've seen her in other anime, even though it is an original design for this one. You've got Reina looks great. Obviously, Koito Minase with her fucking awesome headphones that she won't even take off in the ocean. It's an absolutely outstanding set of character designs. And so I think when you mix that with the acting, even in lesser episodes, which this does not hit 100% on its episodes, the characters are vibrant enough to carry you through.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And the character designs are phenomenal. And especially they work so well with each other, right? That they all kind of visually play off each other in really great ways. I especially love, you've got Kurumi's character design, which is maybe the most silly because she's got the two, I don't even know if you technically call them pigtails at this point, but whatever they are, because they're sticking straight up and then descend over her head like they're rabbit ears almost. And it's like, it's a very kind of silly character design on paper in some ways, or like conceptually, but the way that they animate it and pull it off, it looks fantastic. So yeah, I would say across the board, the character designs pop really well, and then our actors bring them to life. So we've got Haruhiko, who is our lead, played by Shimano Hiro, who, of course, we've talked a lot about with Kimetsu no Yaiba because he is Zenitsu there. We have also talked about him with KyoAni because he is Metja Mochimazui, the prince from Tamako Market, which is a relatively small role, but still a fun one. And this, by the time you're at 2016, Shimano Hiro is, he's not yet Zenitsu, so he's not in, like, the most popular fucking anime of
He's not touring around the world for the theatrical screenings of individual episodes of the TV show, as he is now with Kimetsu, but yes.
Yes, but he's definitely played the lead in several shows and stuff at this point, so it's like he's definitely kind of a known figure. And he does a very good job. Obviously, it's like he's, I feel like in many ways, Haruhiko is the sort of the blandest character, kind of by design, because he's the protagonist. But when you get into the last few episodes, and some of this is not actually Shimano, because you have obviously a different actor playing kid version of Haruhiko in the kid episode. But when you get into those last few episodes, like episode 10, episodes 12, 13, where you get a little bit more of the kind of emotional depth of Haruhiko, I think Shimano does a really good job of playing that and bringing that stuff out without making it super heavy, but making it feel like you get access to more of that character's sort of like inner struggles that have been there the whole time of his like mommy issues, basically, to say the way that sounds dismissive, but this way of like, his relationships with Lulu and his relationship with Mai so clearly are reflective of the kind of relationship he wanted to try to have with his mom and he couldn't. And I feel like that's baked into the character in a way that works well in the writing, but especially when you get to those last few episodes, brings it out so much in the performance that I love.
I agree. And he's one of my favorite actors. I just love him in everything I've seen him in. He was recently adult Momonosuke in One Piece. I had to add to your list of credits because you never put in One Piece credits, and I have to add those.
I don't know who's important in One Piece. So it's like, because I don't know, is this a guy, Shimano Hiro is in one episode of One Piece? Or is this like the main character of an arc of One Piece? I have no idea. So I don't know what to put or what not to.
Technically, Momonosuke was in the show for like 10 years before Shimano played him, because Momonosuke grows up at the end. Anyway, it's a whole thing. He's very good there as well, but I love him in everything I've seen him in. I praised him a few months ago when I reviewed the Scott Pilgrim anime on Netflix, because he plays Scott Pilgrim in the Japanese dub and is so good. But no, I think it's key to this show working is that, yes, he is a blander character, though very much by design, because he is the straighter. He's not completely straight. He's very silly, but he's the straighter, figure within all of these crazy, colorful characters, but he's so good, and I think he can do the like fun lecturing the audience. It really is one of my favorite things about this show is that it has that strict structure of every episode opening with a little lecture from Haruhiko, and Shimano has so much fun with those. But also then when the character gets ridiculous, anyone who's watched Kimetsu will tell you he has the best silly screams in the business, and so he does that beautifully. The OVA is such a good showcase of his basically his Zenitsu voice, and it's fantastic.
Yes, yeah, it's a very fun character, and yeah, those lectures at the beginning, getting into the sort of like pseudoscience and philosophical topics and stuff, and having the character lecture to you about it are incredibly fun, and are good showcases there. Then you have Mai, Kawakami Mai, who's played by Urasaka Sumire, whom, of course, we've talked about a lot recently because she is Dekamori in Love, Chuunibyo, and Other Delusions, which was her first really big breakout role. She's in a whole bunch of stuff now. And this is one of those where I'm once again reminded by the fact that I cannot, for the life of me, identify her voice, which is not a criticism in any way. But like if you put every character she's played next to each other in shows that I've seen, and you played clips of them, I would still not be able to tell you that those are all Urasaka Sumire, because she's such a chameleon. Like, there's nothing about the performance of Mai where I can hear in her voice the same qualities in Dekamori compared to other actors in this show that I can definitely tell it's Uchi Maya. I can definitely tell it's Hayami Saori. Urasaka Sumire, like Mai, I would just have had absolutely no idea, even though I just heard her all the time in Yakuza and as Dekamori in Love, Chuunibyo, and Other Delusions. And it's such an impressive quality to her as an actress to me that I just cannot pinpoint the essential quality of her voice, because it feels like it shifts so much based on the character she plays.
She's a chameleon, and as your list of credits here, just citing her roles in Urusei Yatsura and Overlord and all of these shows, she's huge these days, obviously.
Yeah.
I could hear the Dekamori in there a little bit, but what was fun for me was going from Chuunibyo to this was hearing the Dekamori is such a silly, over-the-top character. Mai is more... She's our female lead. She's a little more serious, a little more, like, outwardly emotional. But I could hear some of that playfulness to it, and it was just fun to hear her make that transition. And it's a great character and a great vocal performance. Really good, co-lead with Hirohiko there, and I just like this character a lot.
Yeah, and I think it's, she just has all this good action stuff with, like, obviously some of that is, I think Uesaka Sumire is good at, like, putting, like, that strength in the voice where it feels so satisfying when she just kicks the shit out of a phantom. And obviously, like, the animation is a big part of that as well. But she has her, like, crazy chants about, like, the earth element versus the water element, all that shit, and she like rubs her liver and stuff like that, and obviously makes the boobs bounce, because that's part of this character as well. But all that stuff, I just think like there's such a strength to the character that I feel in the performance. And then again, when you get into those last few episodes, particularly the little boy Haruhiko episode, that one just... Holy shit, this character, it's so much emotional depth. And this is episode 11. There's a whole scene with her and little kid Haruhiko in the bedroom at night where he gets afraid of the lightning. And it's just the warmth in the character you feel and how Uesaka Sumire modulates the performance, where usually Mai is this kind of a little bit more hot-headed character. In a comedy role, she's usually like punching or kicking someone for comic effect. And like... there is an intentional kind of like motherly aspect that the character takes on in the last few episodes. And I think the way that Uesaka Sumire modulates that performance to get us to that point is really fantastic.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
All right.
And then we've got the biggest star of this show in like the third build part, which is part of the funny thing of going back 10 years and going, oh, right, she wasn't always the star of everything. And that is Miss Hayami Saori as Reina Izumi.
Yes, Jaime Saudi, which I did a thing of I experimented with, like, let me go through and pull in every show I've seen that I could find easily that she is like a starring role character in, and it came out to a list of like 12 to 15 shows. I'm like, holy shit. She really like, it's one thing when you like sit down and try to actually go through and list it, that you realize how many things she has been in and how big Jaime Saudi is. Obviously she kind of really needs no introduction. In recent times, obviously Your Forger is the big thing with Spy Family. Also Shinobu in Kimetsu no Yaiba, which is still one of my, it's not a character that doesn't that show that much, still one of my favorite performances by her though.
She's good. And she's Ayaka, who was my main forever in Genshin Impact. And I just want everyone to know, Sean forgot Yamato in One Piece. I mean, how fucking dare you? She was almost a Straw Hat Pirate, Sean. You don't watch
Jonathan,
One Piece.
Let me highlight the word here in this that means like why she really doesn't need to be on the list, whoever this Yamato person is. It's almost a Straw Hat Pirate.
So for Sean, you haven't seen One Piece. Everyone who has knows what I'm about to say. She was clearly cast with the intention she was the 11th Straw Hat Pirate. That's why they got someone that big for that part. She's so perfect as Yamato. Everyone on Earth just assumed for all of Wano, Yamato is Straw Hat number 11. Up to the point where in the final chapters of One Piece, she goes and asks Luffy, like, can I formally join the gang? He's like, yup. She comes into the bathroom, into the spa with all of them when they're doing the hot springs. It's great. And then it is the clumsiest moment in the history of all 25 fucking years of One Piece is Yamato inexplicably at the last moment says, I'll catch you guys later. I'm going to stay in Wano for a little bit. And I assume there's going to be a dramatic moment soon in the story where she reappears to join. She will be one of the Straw Hats. It would be so weird if we never see her again. But yeah, it's a bummer. She has more dialogue than any of the other Straw Hats save Luffy in the Wano arc. And she was an absolute star on that show for 4 years or however long Yamato was on it. And it's just a bummer. And is that related to the show we're talking about today? No, but we haven't done a One Piece season yet, so I have to rant about this somewhere.
Yes, I'm also just going to highlight the other most important role she has here in my notes, because maybe Yamato couldn't be a Straw Hat because Jaime Saori was too busy being sister to Boruto, son of Naruto, Himawari Uzumaki. Herself, because she is also in Boruto as Naruto's daughter.
What's Naruto's wife names? It's
Hinata.
Hinata Himawari. That's not as funny as Naruto to Boruto.
Yes.
It should have been like Binata or something. I mean, come on.
Yeah. Anyways, Jaime Saudi, the voice actress of our times, she is in fucking everything. I mean, one thing is, like, I also had forgotten, she's in a bunch of Gundam because she's Yurin in Gundam Age, of course, the tragic heroine who dies in part 1. And then she's Isla in Gundam Build Fighters, the cool Russian lady who's your like cyber dude type lady. And then I forgot that she was the recast of Lala Soon in Gundam The Origin as well, which is just an amazing recast. Obviously like a necessary recast because the original actress had passed away. But yeah, it's just Jaime Sauri. She's in everything, and because she's incredibly good, and she's incredibly good in this as well. And Reina, I adore this character so much. Her Phantom Eater abilities are fantastic, and the way she just has a cartoon mouth. Obviously, she always has a cartoon mouth because she's an animated character, but she has this ridiculous Looney Tunes mouth when she eats the phantoms. It just like opens up and whoa, and she sucks them in, and then she always says "Gochiso samadeshita" when she's done.
Yes.
I like that that's the character that eats like Goku, and just like when they go to a restaurant, she always has 1,000 plates stacked up next to her.
She's the funniest of the main like five cast members, I think. And part of that is, I think Hayami Saori, and this is put to good use as Yor on Spy Family, is someone who just the way she says words is funny. Like her basic delivery of not funny lines becomes funny. And I think that is good for Reina, because Reina is outwardly the most like straight-laced, polite, normal girl of the group, but she happens to be a freak who eats everything. And so it's actually very funny, and I think having Hayami Saori do it just makes it perfect. I can't imagine anyone else doing this part.
Yeah, it's a great character because she's kind of like low-key super weird. Like, she doesn't seem weird on the surface, but the more you learn about the character, that's just kind of, she's an oddball. And yes, like she definitely gets a lot of really great comic moments throughout the series. And then her like big episode 4, is one of my favorites, and is kind of where the show, I think that's like the first great episode the show has, and it's like such a showcase for her, of her dealing with her family issues and all that kind of stuff. It's great. Then we have Koito Minase, who's voiced by Uchi Maya, who is, of course, Rika from Love, Chuunibyo, and Other Delusions, as well as a million other things, which was very big by this point, by the time you get to 2016, because this is 3 years after Love, Chuunibyo, and Other Delusions. But also playing a fairly different character than Rika here. She gets like the super cool, kind of aloof, badass character, but that is also secretly a massive goofball. It's a great character, a great performance. And my favorite thing about this character is her like addiction to sugar that is just played super low key, but it's just she's constantly eating little like snacks, or when she has coffee, she just pours like massive amounts of sugar in there. And there's one episode, I forget who she does this to, but like it's to, in the episode, Rudu turns into like a adult, like normal sized person. Yeah, and she tells her whole big story about like, oh my god, like it's like my tragic backstory, and then Koito walks up with this cup of coffee, gives it to her, and just, it's not even the focus of the scene, but Lily like sips from it. It's like, oh my god, it's so sweet. And the scene focuses on something else at that moment, but like the very underkey way they play that character trait, I just find absolutely hilarious.
I love Minase. She's the coolest member of the group. She's the hottest member of the group. You've got that fucking awesome, like, reddish hair, the headphones around her neck, the aloof nature. She's got, like, the white, like, sports jacket on. She's cool. She's cool as shit. I want to be her friend.
Oh, okay, that took a weird turn at the end, but...
What?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, you can be friends with Minase. Then I'm actually going to skip the next person in my notes because we'll go back to her. We have then Kurumi, or Kumamakura Kurumi, which is the best name.
Such a good name. Because the two characters they came up with here, Kurumi and Lulu, because we haven't said Lulu's full name, are the best names in the show, and they're the ones invented for the show. Yeah, Kumamakura Kurumi. Say that 5 times fast. She rocks.
Yes, voiced by Kuno Misaki, who is, the little girl character in a whole host of different things, including Clay in Genshin Impact, just like one of the most adorable characters in existence. She's Fapata in the most recent season of Made in Abyss. She is Momo which is one of the youngest sister in March Comes In Like a Lion, which is also one of the most adorable characters in the history of anime. And then she also plays one of the main characters in Licorice Recoil, which is one of the really popular shows from, I think, 2 years ago now. And that character is also named Kurumi, which is just very funny. It's just,
yes.
And she's like, I think that's the hacker girl, if I remember correctly, is that character. And it's basically, if you wanted to, like, have a competition to see what is the cutest little girl character in the history of anime, you just have to go through the list of credits that Misaki Kuno has played and then take all those characters and throw them in a gladiatorial arena and make them fight to the death, and have the most tragic thing you've ever seen. But the prevailing character would be the cutest character in the history of anime, because that's Misaki Kuno. I don't know what's going on with her voice. I don't know how she sounds like this. Oh my God, it's just the most adorable thing in the world. And you've got, in terms of the adorableness, you have the fucking cat episode where Kudami turns into the cat and she can't speak properly, and so she's like making all these cat noises. And by the end of the episode, she's not even saying words. She's just like mewing. Like she does stops doing even like anime like nya cat sound effects. And she's actually trying to sound like a cat, and it's the most adorable thing you have ever heard in your entire life. Like I need that as like a ringtone or something for when I'm depressed. It's just her making cat noises in that episode, because it's amazing.
It's wonderful, and I think in that, battle royale you're talking about, the very depressing little girl battle royale that you've laid out for us, Sean, I think Kudami might have a good shot at winning, because she's got Albrecht, who is a very strong bear, and he rocks, and he is awesome. And I think maybe it's because Kudami is not on, or she's like in the background of the cover of the Blu-ray I have of this. I didn't know there was like a little girl member of the group. I had seen all the other character designs. And so when you get into that, I'm like, oh no, she's just going to be one of the main characters. It surprised me, but I like it. I mean, obviously she doesn't go to the high school. That's part of what's weird. In most battle shows, it's the people who go to the high school. She goes to the elementary school. But I think she provides a really good dose of just frankly weirdness to the show, and I like it.
Yes, and then of course you have her big standout episode, which is episode 6, which is the one where you go into her subconscious with the bears. And that episode, just the climax of that episode in particular, is very touching, because you get Kudami like facing her like kind of inner insecurities and stuff, and you get that kind of inner strength of the character. And I think that's one of those things where Misaki Kuno is good at playing that as well. It's not just adorable and all of that. There's like a real kind of human element to the character and the growth you feel and the strength she has, that it's just a really, really phenomenal performance.
Yeah,
but it's
absolutely
not my favorite performance in the show, because my favorite performance and my favorite character in the show is Lulu, played by Tadakoto Azusa, which is the mascot character, effectively. But I just, I think KyoAni does these kinds of mascot-y characters like better than anybody. Any character that they can find that they just get to, as animators, just lean into some shit, it's the best. It's very much like my feelings for Dera in Tamako Market, where they just get to make a character that's fucking crazy, and they just go hog fucking wild with it. And that's so much Lulu, where they have so much fun with her being this little tiny person, and there's so many incredible gags just constantly in the show, whether it's a gag front and center or it's just something dumb going on in the background. They're always having so much fun with this weird little tiny spunky girl who's flying around and just getting angry and having a good time and just going absolutely buck fucking wild while she's like 2 inches tall. And it's great. It's hilarious. I just adore the character. And I think Tadakoto Azusa, who's a great actress, who's been in a bunch of stuff. Like, her big things are a lot of, like I said earlier, she's in a lot of like idol type games and stuff like that. Her breakout role was Kiriya Aoi in the series Aikatsu, which is like idol katsu, like idol activities. She's in Bang Dream, which is another one of those games. But she is just phenomenal here. And she is also something I've been sad about for like a year at this point. About a year ago, they canceled one of my favorite podcasts, which she co-hosted a podcast with the VTuber Hoshimachi Suisei called Heikosen Scramble, or Parallel Line Scramble. It was a great podcast. It went for like 2 to 3 years, and then they ended it. And I'm still not totally over it. But Tadakoto is a great actress, very funny person on a podcast, and fucking just absolutely incredible character in Lulu.
Lulu rocks. Lulu's centric episode, which I think is episode 10, is the funniest one in the entire show. It just the jokes they get to do with her in a human body where she can't fly, like where they're like, the class is downstairs, okay, and she jumps out the window, killed me. I think you are probably, if you're watching this on YouTube, looking at the picture of her image in the sky after everyone thinks she has exploded, because that's probably the image I'm using for this episode.
That's the biggest laugh I got in the whole fucking show.
Me too.
That was the thing I saw. I'm like, I need to get that screenshot. Like, even if I don't have time to get screenshots for anything else in this episode, like, that is the number one screenshot I need, is the firework going off and her fucking face there. Because, oh my God, it's so good.
It is the best, like, fake character death joke scene I've ever seen, which I know that sounds specific, but, like, that's a joke that a lot of anime do.
Yes.
Where, like, a character you think or you know really isn't going to die, but the characters think is dying. That is the best version of that joke I have ever fucking seen, and it is because it climaxes with her winking mascot face in the sky. Oh my God, that episode rocks.
Yes, and Lulu, it's just such a great character. And then, of course, as with all the other characters, like one of the things that makes this show really good is that it's primarily comedic, but it also, but it's not a skit show. It's not a gag show.
Yeah.
It does have a fundamental character drama underpinning everything. And so Lulu, she's got her own issues, which you get in that episode 10. But then also in the last couple of episodes where you kind of learn her true nature and stuff, and she gets more wrapped up in those things, there's other dimensions to the character, and I think she plays all that stuff phenomenally as well. And so, yeah, it's just a absolute joy of a character. And it's the character that, like, when I went back and did screenshots for this show, for my notes, like, it's the most fun I had. Was taking screenshots of things with her, because it's always just the best expressions, the best visual gags, the best, like, body posing and stuff like that. They just, every single animator working on the show felt like, it feels like their favorite character was Lulu. Everyone's favorite character is Lulu. She's got to be, because of how much fun she is.
Very similar, I think, to Dara in Tamako Market, of just this weird-ass character on the side, this show being much weirder than Tamako Market in general, where you can really just play with things, and it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, speaking of good... Oh, are there any other actors we wanted to talk about?
I think, there's a couple of others, but they're all, like, kind of... Well, actually, there's two more. Then there's a few others that we'll hit when we get to their episodes. I do have to just shout out, we have our school mom here, Hiko Inoue, who plays the teacher, Himeno, who is... Obviously, this is the actress who's the mom and everything. She's not... But maybe this character is literally a mom. I don't know. But she is the school mom, as is appropriate. And also have a shout out. I did not remember that he was in this show. We've got Sakaguchi Daisuke, who, of course, we've had in Clannad. We had in Hyoka as the best friend character. He is here as Shosuke, who is not really, actually, like, a notable character, other than the fact that he's voiced by Sakaguchi Daisuke. It feels like in a different version of the show that had more episodes, he'd be like his characters in Clannad or Hyoka and have more of that kind of position as, like, the other dude on the show who's, like, the best friend guy. But because this isn't really one of those shows, he never quite gets to that position, and it kind of feels like that's the point of the character, is the joke that, like, he's not really one of the group, but you need some other dude there occasionally, and that's what Shosuke is there for, and it cracks me up. And the best part is then in the OVA, where there's a bunch of sequences in the OVA where it feels like they're treating him like he was always the dude he's like with them playing ping pong and stuff. And it's just like, who's this guy? Like, why is he still hanging out with us? Like, why is this guy still here?
It's great. And it's like, they could have gotten someone more anonymous for that part, but getting Daisuke Sakaguchi just makes it kind of perfect.
Yeah. So other than that, I think all the other characters are just one-off episode characters.
Yeah, so let's talk about them. Let's talk about these episodes, starting with I think, kind of fantastic premiere in terms of setting up how fucking weird this show is going to be and what its priorities are. I liked the first episode quite a bit.
Yes, I think the first episode is, very, very fun. It just is very madcap, especially compared to the later episodes, because it has to establish the world, establish all the characters. So it's got definitely more, like, kind of action-y stuff than the average episode of the show, because it's got 3 whole Phantom fights in it. It's got the one at the beginning, it's got a short one in the middle where you introduce Izumi and she eats all the phantoms that are making the graveyard, and then you have your big limbo scene at the end. So it's definitely like, it's a really, really fast-paced opener, but I think it does a really good job of kind of getting you into the world and the characters.
I also think, like, it feels very confident in a way. Again, I think you contrast this with, like, Beyond the Boundary, which also has its complicated demon fighting story of, like, telling you what you need to know about this world, but I think this show also does a good job cueing you into, like, if you don't care to learn that much about the structure of the club and all this, you don't care. We don't care. You don't need to care. The point is they're part of a club. They do their shit. They're a bunch of weirdos. Here we go. And then I think also having the villain of the week being the telephone poles that are doing a limbo dance also does a really good job of cueing into, like, okay, this is not a series about them fighting world-ending threats or even really nefarious actors every week. There's very few of these where the Phantom is like a truly nefarious actor. They're often just like kind of fun-loving goofballs that they have to get a little further off campus for everyone's safety. And this is one of those where it's just the challenge is to do a limbo dance. I think in terms of actually telling you what a show is going to be, what its priorities are, how you should watch it, how you should enjoy it, this is a great premiere. It's very good at doing those things. And I think it being storyboarded by Takamoto Yasuhiro, directed by Kigami Yoshiji, there's a great deal of confidence to it. That I think it would take the show actually a couple more episodes to kind of get back to that level. But I think it starts very strong.
Yeah, and it has like a really great opening piece here where it goes through your kind of lecture with a whole host of different like optical illusions and things like that to sort of like set up what phantoms are, which I love because I think like it does such a good job of getting you in the mind space of like, okay, we're dealing with like weird kind of subconscious things in that world. And then it does technically give you all this exposition that is stuff that, from what I understand, is really more important in the light novel about the like, oh, the Alayashiki company, and they did like a thing, and so it's only people of a certain age have the powers. Like, it technically tells you all that stuff, but none of it fucking matters.
No.
And it's like the thing that sticks in your mind, I think, is the like optical illusion and the perception stuff, which feels more what this show is interested in, because fighting the phantoms and the nature of the powers is more about diving into the character's subconscious, which is much more of a motif throughout the show. Like whether it's literally their subconscious or like symbolically it's going through their sort of like subconscious problems, like their issues with their family. That's what the show is about, and that's the actual connective tissue underneath everything. And I think presenting that with showing all the optical illusions is fantastic. And then you've got this great sequence where Haruhiko's waking up, Dudu physically pries his eyes open, which is great. This is also a sequence that is then mirrored in episode 12, where his mom, that's not actually his mom, wakes him up, which is one of the places where it mirrors that Dudu is kind of a replacement mother figure for Haruhiko in a kind of weird way. And then he gets up in his apartment and it's all pixelated, or like, not even pixelated. It's like it's made out of voxels, which are pixels with volume. So they're three-dimensional pixels. And as they interact with things, they like resolve into their regular 2D animated selves. And it's a fucking fantastic effect. And there's lots of good little weird effects with the phantoms throughout the show. But this one in particular, I think, is just phenomenal in a way that I don't even fully understand exactly what's happening. I'm sure it's mostly just computer generated, but it looks so good, and kind of the way it intersects with the 2D animation, I think, is just fantastic. And the way all the things just sort of slowly morph and shift into 2D objects, it's just a cool overall aesthetic they go for at the very beginning here.
Couldn't agree more. I absolutely love that effect. If I were earlier in my dissertation process, it might have worked in there when I'm talking about 3D graphics and stuff, because it is a really cool scene. Although it's for such a nebulous purpose, I'm not sure what I would say about it other than, damn, it looks cool. But I do love it. And I do just want to say, I like the premise of the show a lot. I like the premise of that there's something happened in the human mind, virus, blah, blah, blah. But the phantoms are things that were there, but we couldn't perceive before. And as we move on, it's like the idea is that it's not even that they come from some external other dimension or something. They are these pieces of like the subconscious acting out in reality. I think that's cool. I like that. And I like the aesthetic of all the phantoms and the creativity around that. It's just something that, it's another reason why I kind of wish there was a second season of this. It's such an elastic, malleable premise that you can do so much with.
Yeah. And I think like one of the things that visual effect at the beginning is communicating is some of the ideas that they're playing with at various points in the series with both semiotics and quantum mechanics, that there's this sense of like our perception and our interaction with the world defines what the world is, either in a literal sense or in a philosophical sense, right? And it's all that stuff of like, is a tree really a tree, right? Is like, or is it our word for a tree and our idea of a tree and the human perception of the tree creates that object in our mind, which is what that object truly is to us versus the thing that exists in the real world, right? It's playing with those kinds of philosophical notions. And so the world being this kind of weird, ill-defined mess of like voxels and static and stuff like that, because the phantoms have the staticky effect. And then as you perceive or interact with them, they become more real and solid and defined. Like that, to me, it's just... It's not like the show, I think, is doing some sort of huge, crazy, mind-bending, life lesson kind of, oh, this is making me sort of re-understand everything about the world around me. But it is using these different cool motifs to just play with the world and what it's doing and the style of the show. And I think it's one of those things where, yes, it is a very episodic show, but there are a lot of things that create a strong sense of connective tissue on that level underneath everything, where there are these big philosophical motifs that connect the different ideas of the episodes together on a more fundamental level. And that's one of the things I think that this show is very good at. And so that's part of what I think that opening is kind of establishing just through a visual sense.
I agree. Yeah, that's a really good reading of it. And there is a lot of intelligence underlying this show, as silly as it is, that I think allows the silliness to be as big as it is.
Yes. And talking about the silliness as big as it is, let's talk about the limbo dance. Because this is the sequence that, like, is kind of legendary. Like, if anybody knows anything about this show, it is this sequence, because it's just crazy. And it's so good. It's such a great... set piece of them all doing this crazy dance. One, it's all set up with this fantastic gag where Haruhiko goes on this whole big rant about like the root of like limbo and the concept in like Christian, like heaven and hell and all that stuff. And then they're like, oh wow, I had no idea that's where all that came from. It's like, oh no, it's a word from this whole totally other place. But it might have something to do with it. And I really love that gag. It's just like, oh well, maybe it has a deeper meaning, or maybe it's just limbo. I don't know. Which is a very good, almost kind of like, I think, like meta joke about what the show's doing with its ideas of philosophy. And almost like the Schrodinger's cat thing of like, is it actually a meaningful concept, or is it just kind of like its own version of a quantum mechanics joke? Because it's more or less what it is.
Neon Genesis Evangelion would be better if someone made a joke about like, does the Spear of Longinus actually have anything to do with the historical Spear of Longinus? No, it just sounds cool. Because that's what that show's doing.
Yeah, it's that kind of thing. It's kind of taking the piss out of itself in a way that's very fun.
Yes.
And then, of course, you've got the actual limbo, which is fantastic. And you've got all these like crazy telephone poles or whatever that are, bending in these crazy ways. And then you get the set piece, the ridiculous set piece that has the most detailed animation of breast bouncing in the history of anime. And it's like, it's legitimately a phenomenal piece of animation. It like feels weird to talk about because of what's being animated, but it's so good because, you have this whole piece where she's having to get super down low. She needs to get under the wire. Her breasts are too big. How do you do this? Well, she starts gesticulating her chest. And the thing that happens, if you look at the animation, you can see that this is what happens, is her breasts bounce out of her bra, which allows them to go lower. And if you look at the animation, you can see it happen. And it is like the most detailed thing in the fucking world. It makes me wonder if they had somebody actually do this as reference, because I don't know how you animate this so well. Because this is not like, your fucking, God, what's that show? High School of the Dead, which has the most other, probably like in that case, very much infamous animation of breast bouncing where like, oh my God, how do you even describe the shot where a bullet is fired and a woman's breasts gesticulate in such a way that the bullet passes between them from a profile view. It's the most ridiculous thing. And it's not the way that a human body would move in any way, shape, or form. It's much more like, an Xbox or PS2 era video game idea of breast physics or jiggle physics. This is like, yeah, that looks like proper body mechanics. Like that looks like how a body moves and deforms under certain kinds of pressures. And it's crazy. Like it's a crazy amount of effort to put into something that is she's got big boobs joke. And it's great.
And I don't know who key animated this sequence. Sakaga Boru does not have the information. And of course, this episode was directed and storyboarded by men. But KyoAni has many more women on staff than
Yes.
most anime places, right? It has
Oh, yes.
much more of a female influence. And like, I think you can see that here. I think you can see it throughout. I think you can particularly see it that the last motion is she gets up and she grabs her breasts because they hurt physically, because that's what happens when you like move them that much on your, that's why people wear like a sports bra when running, right? Or while doing something crazy. And she just did this incredible physical exertion. It's just, the whole thing does feel more like, and again, it is not sexualized. I don't know how you could watch this scene and go, yeah, you'd have a really weird fetish if this is your thing, because it is so stupid and so goofy, but it is also like so physically, like the gravity of it is so there. I would just love to be a fly on the wall while they were animating this sequence and everyone talking about it, because it is, imagine the like fucking meetings they had about the breast physics. It's amazing.
Yeah. Especially because it's not like the show does this all the time. Obviously, it will make these jokes with it will make the jokes with, like, that Haruhiko, has his porn mags, or, have, like, our big-breasted women, right? Like, they'll make those gags every now and then. And really with it's mostly when she does her thing of like where she has to rub a different part of her body, like her kidneys or whatever, to generate whatever element it is for the different elements, which I'm sure that is pulled from some spiritualism or some kind of mythology. I'm not familiar with it specifically, but it's like, chi or something like that that's connected to different parts of her body. And obviously that then causes her breast to bounce because her arm is reaching around and rubbing and causing her breast to move. But again, there's a realism to it that like that would distract Haruhiko because that's, he's a teenage boy. I get it. I understand this. But also there's like, I think there is that sense of like, it feels like whether or not there was a woman directing that episode or even animating that thing, there were women in the room when these ideas were being considered.
Yes.
And a lot more than would be at the average, animation company. And so it feels like that is a part of the sort of overall consideration of those moments. And Mai does not feel like a character that is being sort of dehumanized in a certain way to be this sort of fetish object, which is how that is often played in other series that are oftentimes these kind of Battle Academy shows where you get a lot of this kind of stuff, but it's played to be far more sexual or extremely sexual in some instances. Like there's the series High School DD is probably the most famous one from around this time. It's got like 4 seasons or something. And it is, it's explicitly sexual. It has nudity. It has all that kind of stuff. And there it is. It just feels like it's there to be whatever step is below softcore pornography. It's like, I don't know what that's defined as, but there's something that's like below that level, smut, something like that. And that's not what they're doing here. And I think that's just like, it's an interesting example because you don't get a lot of stuff like this. This is definitely the exception to the rule in terms of the way that women are animated in these sort of shows, particularly women with large breasts.
I agree. And I think it also it helps to point out it's comedic. It's funny.
Yeah.
It's being silly with it. It's having fun with it. It's not taking itself. It does not have the Neon Genesis Evangelion problem of doing crazy comedic sexualizing and then having them go into a deep clinical depression, and back and forth, right? And I think that helps as well.
Yeah. And it also helps that it's like, Mai is the character, right? So it's like, it feels like it's a part of who she is as a person, is her body, as it is for anybody. But like, not every single woman in the show has that body, because that's also how these kinds of shows go. Or if the woman doesn't have that body, that is then fetishized in its own way. And the show doesn't do that, anything close to that. And so that is another thing that I think helps make it feel more like it's like I'm actually having fun and laughing along with these gags rather than feeling like weirded out by them. And I think part of it is that it feels very particular to Mai's character, and then other characters have other jokes that are suited to who they are.
Yes, absolutely. All right, you want to talk about the second episode where we have a pervert UFO spying on the girls' dorm, which is just a great all of the Phantom premises this season are great. Some are used better than others. I don't think this is like a great episode in and of itself, although it has some very good moments, including we get to meet the winged puppy Marchosius, however you want to say that. Marchosius, and I love that. But yeah.
Yeah, this is definitely like one of the weaker episodes to me, because it feels like it's still them kind of trying to set up certain characters and ideas. Like, this is where they're setting up Minase Koito as a character, even though she hasn't joined the gang yet. You get the thing of the like little computer terminal or whatever that is the like this show's equivalent of in Doctor Who when you have Bad Wolf in graffiti in the background. That's like technically this is the plot thing that leads you to the finale, but you know they're just doing that so that the finale has something that elevates it above a normal episode, so it technically needs to be set up, but the show so does not give a shit about it, as you can tell when that gets resolved by the stuffed teddy bear being a super hacker, and he just fixes it immediately. You know, the Haruhiko's been trying to repair the thing for the whole season, which is a great gag. But because I think this episode needs to be... a lot of energy is spent on setting those things up, the episode itself ends up being fine, but... it doesn't have as clear of a like, oh, this is the episode where X happens. This kind of has like an A plot, B plot structure, which the other episodes don't have because this episode is trying to set up too much. So it's got one plot line, which is about the abandoned factory where they get the terminal. One plot line, which is about the school, like the college girl dorm where you've got the perfect UFO showing up. And that's where you can meet Marcosius, which is a cool and good little boy. But
Marcosius rocks.
Episode, yeah.
There's also the funniest part. Isn't this the one where he cuts his thumb or his finger to like summon Marcosius, and then Mai puts it in, or one of the characters puts it in her mouth and like heals it? Is it this episode or is it later?
Reina does that, yeah.
Yes, that's a very weird, funny scene.
Yes, where I think her healing powers only come up like one other time in the whole season, which is funny. Yes. I don't know if that's like a leftover from the light novels or something where her healing powers would be more important, but it is something where in a later episode she does it again, and I was like, oh right, that's right, she does have healing powers.
Yeah, a little inconsistent there, although again with the kind of show this is, I think you can forgive that.
Yeah.
The third episode, which is the one where there's the fight on the bridge where there's these phantoms that Mai basically bullied as a little kid. You have it in your notes as she played with them as a kid. I would say she bullied them pretty severely. And Mai needs to fight them, but she needs a second person to help. And so they do this. I think this one has one of the best premises. The whole idea is that Mai and Haruhiko are going to have to sync their memories up so that he can access her memories to do the fighting moves. And it gets into all this metaphysics about like memories being a stored subconscious and all of that. I think the premise is better than the episode for this one. I think the episode is good. I don't know if it ever like quite lived up to how cool that premise is, but I do like the episode.
Yeah, it's a fun episode. It's definitely not as good as some of the later ones, but it's where this is the first episode that feels like this is a normal episode of Myriad Colors Phantom World. Like, one is the premiere, and so it has to set up a bunch of stuff. Two is still doing a lot of setup. This feels like, okay, now we have our characters, we have our premise, we've got the rhythm of the show basically down, and it's kind of like the first outing with what that overall structure is, and so it's not as developed as some of the later ones, but it's still definitely a solid episode. It's got a lot of really great gags in it. Like there's this whole bit where they go to the movie theater on a date because Mai and Haruhiko have to date to sync up their memories or whatever, and they at the movie theater they watch this movie that's like if G Gundam and Fist of the North Star did the fusion dance from Dragon Ball, and like where you've got this like not Master Asia guy with a guy who's not Kenshiro from Fist of the North Star, and they do a big super move together where they make it's like the twirling death wheel basically, or hell wheel, which is, if you remember, there is a very similar move in G Gundam where they turn into like a big drill but his head's still sticking out the top, which is very silly looking in that show and in this weird fake anime. But I love the aesthetic of their fake 80s ass Fist of the North Star looking animation. It's so good.
It's the best part of this episode, and it's so convincing. I had to like stop and be like, did they animate this, or is this stock footage from something else? And I thought they probably can't. KyoAni this isn't like Toei where they can go grab stuff out of the archive from some old show. They weren't making shows. Well, they were, but it was other people's shows. And then you look at it and like, okay, it is new animation, but it is such a convincing facsimile of this like 80s, 90s Fist of the North Star G Gundam thing. It's wild. I want to see them do like a whole fucking OVA of this. It's great.
Yeah, there's like all this great stuff of like there are like, you know, like defects or like scratches on the film and stuff like that. That's there like you would have in an actual old piece of animation. It's really well done. And then you do get the great revelation at the end where, because the whole thing with her playing with the girls is that Mai thinks that, oh, when I was a little girl, I was like a sweet little, dainty little girl. And that's her memory of herself. And then she actually sees that memory once they cook up to their subconsciousness. And then she sees that, yeah, she's just horribly bullying these two little phantom girls. And Maya has to do a lot of self-reflection about her own self-image, which, you know, I think is fair enough. I think most people have that, of where they thought of themselves as a certain way as a child, that they think they have changed from or something, or grown or something like that. And in reality, it's like, no, like maybe you were more like that as a kid than you ever realized.
Yes, that is one of the other big laughs of the episode. It's also kind of sweet when it gets resolved. It's good stuff. Episode 4, as you noted earlier, is a big early standout because this is the Reina-centric episode, and also just one of the most creative uses of the Phantom premise. I think this is where we start to see just how elastic the premise is, because the whole idea is Reina takes this bus that is a Phantom bus that takes her to like a different dream world house, and they get to do so much cool creative stuff with this episode. It's an Ishidate Taichi one, and it is a real standout.
Yeah, it's just a great episode, because this is where it starts, I think, becoming clearer that there is this overall motif of like family that is at the heart of the show, which obviously is very clear when you get to the last 2 episodes, but they're building it up all through this stuff, because it's also there in the Mai episode, because Mai lives on her own, and this guy, I think her like memories of being this like cute little girl are kind of affected by their memories of her mother. And so you get some of that in there in episode 3, and then they really focus in on it here in episode 4 through Reina, because she has her very strict parents that she's trying to get away from. That sort of summons this phantom bus. But just this episode just is so gorgeous. This is one place where it's worth to comment on how good the use of color is in this show, where obviously It's in the title, Myriad Colors Phantom World, but it really is, it feels like a fixation for this series, is that they want to like make use of really great, interesting colors. And so particularly at this, all the stuff at evening and the use of orange and purple, it's just absolutely gorgeous. And then you get into the sort of fairy book crayon world in the Phantom Dimension or whatever. And that also has this just really great kind of different color space that it all exists in. And that variety of color throughout the episode is really great.
It is. And her family in the Phantom world are all rabbits, like,
Yes.
you know, anthropomorphic bunnies. And if this were any other animation studio, I would say this is just a coincidence. But when it's KyoAni and it's the people who made Haruhi and some of the weirdest animation ever, I'm going to go on a limb. I'm not sure this isn't a reference to Inland Empire, the David Lynch movie. I made a joke tweet about this. If you've ever seen Inland Empire, it has this entire, probably the most famous images from that movie is the bunny family. It's people in like big anthropomorphic bunny costumes doing a very bad sitcom, basically, but with Angelo Badalamenti like ominous Twin Peaks music over top it. It's a phenomenal sequence, and it's in David Lynch's by far most avant-garde movie. And there's something about the visceral, like the bunny family in that, and then the bunny family in this, which aesthetically is very different, but I could not help. It's the one tweet I made about this show while I was watching it, was comparing those two screenshots. And again, if it were anyone else, it would probably not pass my mind, but I'm pretty confident the people at KyoAni have watched Inland Empire. It feels like this is the kind of group of artists who would be thinking about that.
You know, it's definitely not outside the realm of possibility.
Yes.
And with
That's all
the
I'm
bunnies,
saying.
we do have 2 great guest stars here to play the bunnies.
Yes.
We have Fumihiko Tachiki, who is Gendo from Neon Genesis Evangelion, along with a million other things. Also, he is every random dude in the background in Lucky Star, which is one of the best things he's ever done in his career, is just being every single person in Lucky Star. And then the mother is Hisakawa Aya, who is obviously the new voice for Bulma after Hino Mitsuru passed away. She also, like more historically, is Sailor Mercury, and then we've seen her because she is Misuzu's aunt in Air. Or like her, like, you know, surrogate mother, effectively. But so 2 obviously like legendary tier voice actors to play these 2 silly bunny characters, and they do such a good job. You know, because their voices are so evocative that I think it just really sort of like centers you in this weird, different kind of world that's not entirely like, your masterpiece theater kind of thing, but it's a little bit adjacent to that in terms of anime history. I think kind of brings you into that very wholesome kind of family-based entertainment thing that they're kind of pulling on here. And I think the way that connects to the central themes of what Reina wants from her family and her preconceived notions of what a family should be, which is this like children's cartoon with rabbit people and all that kind of stuff in this kind of idealized world, and the reality of her family, which is, she's estranged from her sister who left because she felt suffocated by her parents, and the parents, being very strict around Reina. This a thing she struggles with. And then you kind of see her bits and pieces grow from here with her relationships and her friendship with our gang that feel like they kind of fill some of this gap for her. But I do think it's a very effective plot that is told very effectively. Absolutely.
I will admit episode 5, the next one, is probably the episode I remember the least. I think it's kind of
yes.
It's okay. It's a Minase sort of focused episode. I don't think it's as effective as the ones on either side. And I think it probably would have been better to have a kind of more pure comedy episode between two of the heavier character-focused ones, which is 4 and 6. Although 4 and 6 are also very funny, to be clear. But yeah, this is one you don't have screenshots from, and I think probably it makes sense.
Yes, yeah, this is just, it feels like it's too similar in terms of plot beats to episode 4 while not being as interesting as episode 4, because it's a little plainer, right? You have all the stuff with Minase who blames this like whole phantom that showed up when she was taking care of the rabbits at her school or whatever, for in that being when her powers appeared, and then estranging her from other familial and like friend type relationships. And so there's, the show is building on similar themes and motifs, but I think it's just a bit too similar in contrast to what just came before. That I think this episode being spaced out somewhere else in the season or something could have maybe worked slightly better. It's still fun, and Minase is still a very good character, and this kind of gets her into the overall group, but it definitely is one of the less notable episodes. It does, however, open with a great gag where they're talking about rhythm and all this stuff. And Lulu has this thing where she says, one of my friends is an anime director, which the word she's using there is the same word you use for an episode director. He says that singing karaoke helps improve his rhythm, which then makes him a better storyboarder. And there's like a clip of like an anime director that you can't see his face, and he's like trying to draw storyboards. He's got like a stopwatch, which is of course is a thing you would do to try to time the motion and stuff for your frames. Which I tried to see if I could find who that is referring to, because obviously there is a specific person that they are talking about here. I do not know. Is that Kawanami Eisaku, who's made that episode? Is it Ishihara Tatsuya, who's the director for the whole series? I do not know who it's referring to, but I'm sure people like KyoAni had a good time putting that inside joke in there.
I like the image of somebody sitting down to do their storyboards with their stopwatch and just singing songs while they're storyboarding to do their rhythm. It's great. And not unheard of. The Hayao Miyazaki famously would get the theme songs for his movies made at the beginning of the process so he could just listen to them on a loop while doing storyboards. That's what he did on Spirited Away, is that Always With Me song was written before he worked on all that, so he could do the storyboards to the music. That was not for syncing purposes, but but I like this image. It's very funny, and it's too bad this does not have like a Haruhi-esque 8-part making of documentary so we could learn all the secrets.
Yes. Before we move on to the next episode, I want to briefly point out a shot that was in episode 4 that I forgot to bring up. It's at the end of my screenshot gallery. There is another just like in a series of KyoAni just fucking showing off shots where there's this random shot of a glass on a table. They're all talking at a cafe, because if KyoAni is good at animating scenes, it's people sitting at a cafe talking to each other while showing reflections of people in water or glasses. And there's a student who walks past the glass behind it, and her reflection is getting reflected in the water, but because it's a cylindrical glass through water, it's being reflected backwards, and it's a mirrored reflection, and she intersects with her own reflection and passes through it, and it is such a fucking mic drop, holy shit, that looks so good, and like the detail of the movement and the reflection and how it's distorted. I'm like, what the fuck? It's so unnecessary, but it's so good.
So good. It's a 100% Suzumiya Haruhi-esque shot.
Yes.
This kind of thing was all over that show. It's also one where you have to, it's not just the animation, it's the whole photography department putting that together, because it's got a shallow focus with just the glass in focus. So even the girl is a little out of focus. And like, that's not something, you animate everything in focus. This is something that the photography department is doing to make it look right. And it's, again, KyoAni has one of the best photography departments in the whole industry to be able to pull off shots like this.
Yeah, and it's those kinds of touches that really separate these kinds of episodes from your average show, just sort of like whatever generic show you're watching. That's like little moments like that, because because I say it's like it's unnecessary, which I don't actually mean, because it is obviously like reflections and things like that are inherent as a visual motif to what they're talking about, which is apparent. This is a great segue in episode 6, because episode 6 is also playing with a huge amount of reflection stuff, because this is the Kurumi episode, directed by Ogawa Taichi, but storyboarded by Yamada Naoko, which has this phenomenal opening piece where she's walking on the sidewalk to go to school, where she's stressed out because she helped in the previous episode, and that's where her powers are first kind of discovered by the other girls. And so Mai asks her, hey, Kurumi, like, can you come, like, join us and help us out and be part of our team? And she accepts that, but only because she felt kind of, like, coerced into it. And so she's pondering it on the way to school, stops at a stoplight. Another thing we've seen in a lot of KyoAni episodes is the use of stoplights as a visual metaphor. And she stopped at this, like, crosswalk, looking down into this puddle that is a, like, perfect mirror reflecting the sky. And there's all these great shots of her looking, you see a reverse shot looking down up at Kurumi where you see the sky, and then you have her perspective looking down at Albrecht, and then the sky is behind Albrecht, but that's the sky reflected in the puddle. And it's just this great sequence where then she starts jumping between the puddles, saying like, oh, if I'm able to cross without falling into the puddle, then I'll go to the school and I'll do the thing, right? And I'll go help them. And this is obviously the where then she ultimately falls in with Haruhiko and Lulu, and that's what transports them into her subconscious world with the bears. But it's just an amazing sequence visually and in terms of the narrative of what's going on there. And again, this kind of visual motif that then recurs throughout this episode of reflections and mirrors, which is, of course, a thing that's connected to everything they're talking about with quantum physics and the subconscious as well. Because if you're talking about mirrors are a huge thing in psychoanalysis and Freud and all that kind of stuff. So it's just, yeah. So immediately in episode 6, you're just jumped into just an absolute legendarily gorgeous scene, I think.
100%. It's so phenomenal. And then the rest of the episode is great too. And honestly, I think this episode inaugurates the run of just this to the end of the show is great. Just everything. Yes. I think every one of these episodes, 6 through 13 plus the OVA, are all varying shades of good to outstanding. And maybe all of them are even in the range of great to outstanding. It's a really good run of episodes. This one is basically, hey, if you ever wanted to know what it would look like if KyoAni made a Care Bears episode, this one's for you. If you ever want to know what a Voltron scene would look like, you get that here as well with her big bear robot. You even get a good magical girl transformation scene at the end. It's a lot of KyoAni trying on different hats. It's completely bananas because we are in a world of teddy bears, but it is also very sweet, and I think an unexpected swerve for the show to tell this story about the inner world of a little girl, because again, Kurumi is the last of the main characters to sort of enter the plot. She is an invention of the show, not of the books. So if you were one of the people who had read the books, you wouldn't, know about her. I don't know how big a sector of the audience that was. But I also don't think you expect this show to maybe have this kind of character dynamic in it. And I liked it. It's a really surprising character dynamic to have. And the world that we enter into just gives them so many places to stretch their legs. I wonder if part of why this one has a divide in storyboard and direction is just because it's a particularly complicated episode in the number of settings you have, the number of color environments they have to have. You have the real world early on, which is a very different kind of color palette than the main fantasy landscape, which is very different than sort of the flashbacks and the battle scene at the end. It's a complicated episode.
Yeah, and I think it's when you contrast this with 5, I think it's interesting that in some ways this episode is even more similar than 4 or to 4 than 5 is, because both of those deal with, we're going to like this kind of subconscious world that represents something of what's going on in this character's mind. But I think like the differing aesthetic and how different Kurumi is as a character versus Reina, and the nature of her sort of like issues being here more about her lack of self-confidence than necessarily like needing a family and friends. Obviously the lack of self-confidence is kind of connected to some of those things, but it has a different kind of shade to it that I think this is able to stand out and feel more like its own episode dealing with similar motifs, rather than something that is just living in the shadow of a better episode, which is what episode 5 felt like. Because yeah, all throughout this, I think it's just a great episode that tells a really fantastic story that feels different than some of the other stories in the show, because Kurumi is such a younger character. It gives it a very different feel.
We also have a great guest actor in this one that you missed, Sean, because Prince Salmon, the evil bear, is voiced by Katsuhisa Hoki, and you have no excuse for this one because he is a fucking straw hat, is Jinbei from One Piece. And I recognized him immediately because I fucking love Jinbei, and I love Hoki. He's a great actor, and just a wonderful little guest turn from him as the big dastardly bear who's also kind of a sweetheart at his core.
Yes, and Albrecht the bear, who here gets to be voiced in Kurumi Subconscious, is voiced by Okiayu Yotaru, who is the, he's in like a million things. He's Byakuya in Bleach. He is the dad in Clannad, Nice's dad in Clannad. There's more than one dad. I realized I can't just say
yes,
the dad.
Including the main character.
Yes, exactly. And then he's also, this is the thing that Albrecht reminded me of. He's Lancelot in like Fate Grand Order and like other places where that character gets voiced more than like in Fate Zero where he's just Berserker. And so there's like that like kind of like knightly voice that he does a lot. Albrecht gets that here. But then Albrecht also just gets to be the most adorable little teddy bear, because you have this one scene where he and Kurumi just like look at each other, and the look on his eyes, his little teddy bear eyes when he looks at Kurumi with this very soft expression, is fantastic. And then at the very end, you get this moment where, you know, Albrecht got hurt, and then she turns into the magical girl and goes and fights the giant Voltron bear that is like a riff on the generic Hokkaido like bear sculptures with a salmon in the mouth, which is a thing I've seen in a whole shit ton of anime, and also in Yakuza when you're in Hokkaido in Yakuza 5, there's a whole thing with that. But anyways, she does all that shit, she saves the day, and then she hugs Albrecht, and that is the most adorable thing, where it's the happiest teddy bear you have ever seen in your life, and they're hugging, and then they snuggle noses, and then they teleport back into the real world, and it's just it's the most wholesome thing in the world. It's great.
Yeah, this episode kicks ass. And so does the next one, because the next one is another Kawanami Eisaku episode, episode 7, where everyone at school starts to slowly turn into cats. Yes. And it is as delightful as that premise sounds. It is also as insane as that premise sounds. Honestly, if I have any complaint about this episode, I might say I think it could have maybe pushed the insanity even further in some places, because it is such a bonkers premise. But they do a lot of good stuff with it anyway, and tie it together into a fairly sweet story at the end about this a big house that used to have a lot of cats in it that was ultimately condemned, and they make friends with it. Again, this is something I like about this show. I like it in any kind of show like this, where the villains of the week are never really nefarious, and it is often about making peace with them or becoming friends or something. And I particularly like the resolution of this one, with they decide to clean it up and use it as a clubhouse for everybody at the school, and more cats will come back. And who doesn't love that?
Yes. I also really appreciate this episode because Schrodinger's cat gets thrown around a lot in popular culture, and especially in anime. And nobody fucking knows what it actually is. It's always the most shallow, oh, the cat's a dead and alive at the same time thing.
I realized I didn't know, Sean, until watching this, and he did the whole explanation. I went, oh, I didn't know. I didn't know. My pop culture osmosis had not actually taught me until I watched fucking Myriad Colors Phantom World.
Yes, that this, like, actually they explain it properly. I mean, honestly, it's so good that if I was like a science teacher having to introduce this concept to students, I would show the clip at the beginning where they do the visuals of the two boxes of where you've got the radioactive decay that then will set off the thing that then breaks the poison inside the box. And they show that and explain the sort of the concept of the superposition, which then Lulu, this is a great gag where she's like equivalent. So it's like, oh, so it's like, you know, if you can't see under my skirt, it's like, am I wearing underwear or am I not? I'm both wearing them and I'm also not wearing underwear at the same time. And it's, you know, she has to take it that way. But this episode understands that the whole fucking point of Schrodinger's cat is that it's not possible. It makes no sense. The point of Schrodinger's cat is him poking holes in the concept of that idea in quantum mechanics that observation changes reality, that you observing the results of something determines whether or not this decay has actually happened, which on the quantum level is how we kind of have to understand things working, but does not make sense on a macro level, on the physics of the world that we exist in, not the quantum world. And so there is a inconsistency with how we understand those two kinds of physics, and Schrodinger's cat is a thought experiment to show the absurdity of that quantum mechanics idea when put into a macro level, because of course you cannot have a cat that is both alive and dead at the same time. And so this episode actually explains it, it actually understands it, and it uses it as sort of part of the root of the episode, where you have this great sequence at the end where the cat house either brings back to life or like gives you the little cat Rudolph, which is also great. We've got good animal names, Albrecht, Rudolph. But there's this whole sequence where Kurumi is begging the big cat house phantom to give them Rudolph, and you get this thing of it showing these kind of outlines of cats like fluctuating on each other, where like the phantom seems to determine that Rudolph is alive, seemingly indicating that there's a chance that the cat had died, and that there's this whole thing where then Haruhiko explains that it's not a particularly scientific explanation, but maybe like our thoughts and feelings can alter reality, because wouldn't that be a nice world to live in? And I think that's like such a great resolution and use of the Schrodinger's cat motif in what is also a very silly episode where all the characters get turned into anime cat people.
There's also just so many cool visuals in this one. Like there's the whole sequence where you have the characters in this like netherworld that is represented by film strips of their memories. Honestly, like there's a stretch of this episode that when you have your screenshots here, Sean, I would say looks like it's from like an anime opening, from like a theme song is what it looks like. Because you have those, you have the images of like all of the little cats with like the propellers or like the little pinwheels out over the surface of the earth. There's just a bunch of killer like drawings and images in this one, a bunch of surreal stuff. And, you know, we said episode 5 was probably the weakest of the show. That was Kawanami Eisaku. I'm glad they immediately got to come back with this one, which just kicks absolute ass. And then they also did the OVA, which is fantastic. So, you know, tremendous direction on their part.
Yeah. Yeah. And that whole sequence at the kind of midpoint of the episode where they've gone into the mansion and searching for the cat. And then as they go deeper and deeper in, it becomes more and more strange, where then eventually they realize like it's a 2-story mansion, but they've gone up like 5 flights of stairs. And then like time starts passing this insane way where Haruhiko would be like, man, it's like the sun hasn't even started going down. And then it cuts to Dana looking at the same windows, but it's nighttime. She goes like, hasn't it? And then, like, the seasons all pass in this crazy way. Haruhiko gets this flash where he sees a cat's, like, memories of chasing this fish and then seeing these crayon drawings from a little girl that's clearly the cat's owner, to then the cat looking out the windows of the mansion at a fucking sky whale, just a whale in the sky. And then it does a reverse shot of that, of the cat, and the whale is reflected in the cat's eyes. And you're just like, I don't know what the fuck's going on, but it's rad. Like, it's so cool. And it's just this very evocative, strange, bizarre sequence of events that then ultimately turns into them meeting the big cat mansion and then getting Rudolph back. It's very good.
Very good stuff. Then, Sean, we get episode 8. The monkey episode. By far the most insane thing Kitanohara Noriyuki has directed. Because I think of him as being the director who does some of the more like kind of slow, you know, obviously Someday in the Rain is his like iconic episode. He's done lots of comedy ones too. This is completely unhinged. This is the silliest episode of this show. This is the equivalent of that Beyond the Boundary episode, except that it fits in this show because it is about a bunch of snow monkeys, which is a real thing in Japan. There are these snow monkeys who hang out in hot springs. I actually got to see them. I have a picture of them on my wall somewhere. But we went in Nagano. There's some onsen up in the hills, and you get to go. It's a big hike you have to do to go find them. But the snow monkeys just hang out, and they're just chilling in hot springs. They have the best lives. They're fucking awesome, those little monkeys. And they set up an onsen, these phantoms, right in the school's like courtyard area. And they have to figure out, how do we get these monkeys to leave? And it is so Looney Tunes. It is just a series of gags of one character after another coming up to try to get the monkeys to leave until the end of the episode, and it is absolutely phenomenal on that level, leading and ends with one of the craziest endings I've ever seen in an episode of anime. I adore this episode, Sean.
Yeah, it very much is. It's so similar to that episode from Beyond the Boundary, like down to it ending with like in this impossible way that like there's no way for another episode of the show to happen, basically, unless for that show it would be like that off screen they would have had to deal with that Yomu, or all the characters would have to have been just the most rank motherfuckers for the rest of the show, which also would have been fantastic. But yes, this episode, it's so funny. There's so much shit. I mean, early on in the episode, you get a gag where one of the monkeys eats a banana, throws the banana peel over his shoulder. It lands on a rock. When Mai's going to go fight the big chief monkey, she steps on the banana peel and slips, and then the monkey grabs her and then licks her, and that's when you also find out that the monkey's a big perv, because of course he is. And it's like, as soon as the banana peel comes out, you're like, oh, this is going to be a good episode. This is going to be a good fucking episode.
I love how they, in the first shot of the episode, in the little introduction, we have a very photorealistic drawing of snow monkeys in their onsen. But then when we get the actual monkeys, they are these ridiculous cartoon monkeys that look like they could be from like a Gendy Tartakovsky show, like Dexter's Lab or something. They're very Cartoon Network. But then you've got the boss monkey, who's basically like this big fucking Yakuza motherfucker with a big fur jacket hanging out. He's got these like big arms. I just love the like weird reality they're able to do here because of the phantom idea is so elastic. And then you just have these, all these characters squaring off. You've got Albrecht going in there and immediately getting giant and soggy because they put him in water. You've got Marcosius won't go in the water because he's a dog and he's scared of the pool. You have an entire sequence where they decide to do a Trojan horse and they have Mai and Haruhiko come out in a horse costume. And it's just so silly.
Yeah, it's just the whole process is absolutely ridiculous. They then try to seduce the monkeys with a whole series of characters, which initially does not work, which is the funniest one is that you have Minase comes out and they're trying to get her to smile at them, and she just has the most evil fucking grin. It's like, oh, you gotta stick out your tongue and be all cute, and it's just like she's sticking her tongue out at the doctor's office or something. And then the best part is that it's like, oh, and you gotta wave to him, beckoning him over, and she does this cute little wave, and then she does this fucking the Matrix come get some kung fu pose, and it's great. But then the solution to dealing with the monkeys is the best thing ever, which is Haruhiko realizes, oh, well, if we're trying to seduce them, the thing that female monkeys do to show that they're in heat is that their butts turn red. And so they then go and they paint Mai's butt red, which is so funny. And the whole sequence where Haruhiko's very awkwardly trying to paint on her butt and doesn't want to do it. And then Lulu gives a big speech about no, you got to do it. This is the best, the greatest canvas you've ever been given. If you don't do this, we'll never get rid of these monkeys. And he's like, yeah, I'll go and do it. He has a whole fantasy sequence of him going, oh, this canvas, it's amazing. It's the softest canvas I've ever painted on, while he's in a dream sequence bouncing on her butt. Then it comes out, she's wearing little monkey ear mufflers, and it's a little monkey tail on her bathing suit, and her butt's just painted red. The monkeys all get way into that. They capture the monkey, and then that's where they get the true ending to the episode, where they put Haruhiko in a monkey costume with a red butt, and then the big Yakuza monkey takes him to be his bride, because we learned that the monkey was sad because his wife left him, and that's why he's hanging out at the Zonsen in the first place. Now he's going to get married to Haruhiko up in heaven, like it's fucking Journey to the West, and this is the Monkey King, and what the fuck is even happening anymore?
Oh my god, it's so good. The final image where they're on the like golden path up to the heavens and he's being carried away. This is Hiroshimono. This is why you get Hiroshimono, is for the end of this episode, for him wailing that it's the most, he has not been Zenitsu yet, but this is him previewing his Zenitsu voice basically at the end of this episode. It is marvelous. It makes me want, honestly, I'm going to say this, and we're both going to be mad that this doesn't exist, Sean. If any anime studio could do Journey to the West right, it would be Kyoto Animation. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine them doing like the multi-season adaptation where they really embrace... Because Journey to the West, for those who don't know, is actually a very silly story with a lot of like dumb comedy and stuff. Oh man, they could do that so beautifully. It would be so fun. But anyway, yeah, I love this. This is also where you get the first summoning of Cthulhu.
Yes.
With Haru, because this one really focuses on Haruhiko and Mai, obviously, are down bad for each other. And so this one ends with her almost getting licked again. So he does his crazy, like, extra summon. His clear powers are never quite clear, but that's fine. They don't need to be. And he summons Cthulhu from, the nether realm. And Cthulhu is this big cartoon octopus, and it's very funny.
Yes, it's fantastic. Yeah, this is just... This episode is pure comedy. There's none of the like, oh, it's also about like family drama and like self-confidence. And it's like, no, this is just about a bunch of cartoon monkeys that are horny and they're painting butts red. And it's all like, that's just it. Like, that's just the episode, and it's really good.
It's so good. And a lot of things in the world change. I am glad at the constant that every KyoAni show we watch, Kitanohara Noriyuki has at least one that is like my favorite of the season.
Yes.
Just every time.
He always has one of the best episodes, that's for sure.
Speaking of someone who always has one of the best episode 9 is Kigami Yoshiji working from storyboards by Ishihara Tatsuya. That's a dream team right there.
Yes.
And this one also has, boy, if we're just ranking premises, this might be my favorite premise of any of these episodes, which is that there is a drama club student who wants to put on this play about the Edo period. But she is actually a phantom who has come into existence because the drama club for 10 years couldn't get to regionals. And so she is like the willpower of their desire to get to regionals manifested in a person, and they decide to help her with the play. And as they do the play, her powers make the play real. That could be its own show. That is such a good premise.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. And the guest star for this one is voiced by Kushimitsu Ami, who, of course, we've had in a million things. She's like Duko in Kill la Kill. She's Beidou in Genshin Impact. And she's been in kind of some smaller parts in a lot of different KyoAni things. Like in the Chuunibyo Season 2, she was fake Mori Summer. The actually fake Mori Summer.
Yes.
And so she gets a really fun role as this weird drama student phantom. And yeah, as you say, it's just one of the best premises for this show that could be its own show in its own right. And it also just leads to so much imaginative staging and visuals and stuff, because you have the whole second half of the episode is just them on the stage that then is like interchangeably both the stage play and also they are perceiving it. The actors, our characters, are perceiving it as like this actual, they have been teleported to the Bakumatsu period, Kyoto, where all this is happening, because it's like the story is so crazy if you know Japanese history, where it's like it's the Shinsengumi who are like on the shogunate side, and then they were fighting some of the different kind of rebels that want to reinstate the emperor as the dominant power. But then there is the former head of the Shinsengumi, Serizawa Kamo, who had died and been replaced. He comes back as a phantom. And then at the end of the story, like Sakamoto Ryoma, who is on the opposite side from the Shinsengumi, who's played by Kurumi. This is just so funny. Like they make up and then like ally and say it's like, oh, like a new dawn for Japan rises, because apparently like, I don't know, the fucking Tokugawa shogunate never got rid of, and Sakamoto Ryoma and the Shinsengumi just said like, hey, why don't we all be friends? And like Japanese history has completely changed from this point, and I love this like insane story they tell.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. Yeah, and again, that premise is just so killer that I think this isn't a knock on the episode, but I can imagine there being a 13-episode series that is like about a drama club with like a weird phantom monster where the plays they do come to life. Like, this is a repeatable premise. It's so good. Mm-hmm. And I liked seeing it explored here, obviously. Great episode. But the hits keep coming, because episode 10 is the one where Ruru, we already talked about this one a little bit, becomes a real girl because a witch voiced by Nagatsuma Juri comes and grants the wishes of phantoms, and we get the incredible comedy but then also pathos of Lulu out in the world as a human who keeps forgetting she can't fly.
Yeah, God, this episode's so good. So yeah, so you have the witch, that's the same voice actress who played Satane in season 2 of Chuunibyo and Kana in Tamako Market. So that I always like when they have the voice actors that KyoAni kind of comes back to. Yeah, man, there's so much in this episode that's phenomenal. One, this episode just has a bunch of sequences early on that have so much fun with Lulu's size, where she's sitting there with the fireworks poster, getting all excited about getting to go to this like festival she wants to go to because she wants to drink an entire bottle of ramune, which is a great dream to have when you are a 2 foot tall person, or not even or like a 1 foot tall.
Have you ever had ramune, Sean?
Yes. Yeah.
It's awesome. I love it. You can get it here now, which is great. I've been able to get it at my local store. And for those who don't know, it's the Japanese soda that comes in this like closed neck bottle that has a marble in it. So it's got this, you have to like press the marble down and then you drink through the marble. It's cool. If you've never had one, go look it up. If I were a little fairy girl who couldn't drink ramune because I'm smaller than the actual bottle, I would also dream of becoming big and drinking it.
Yes, but she's there, like, waxing poetic about all of that, while Haruhiko's in the background because he's getting late to school, and he's just stomping around, and from Lulu's perspective, it's like a giant stomping, and, like, the whole screen shakes, and it's, like, has this massive sound effect. He accidentally steps on her because Haruhiko sucks, because Lulu's the best, and how could you do this to her? Because that's great. Then there's this whole sequence where Lulu's on a bench at the park alone with a cat, and she's like holding onto the cat's tail, which again, it's just like they have so much fun with the scale of it. Then the cat, you get a good shot of the cat's butt and its fucking balls, which I had to just take the screenshot because I was like, did they actually draw the testicles on that cat? And they 100% did. And the butthole, it's all right there. And the cat jumps, and when he jumps, from Lulu's perspective, it's like a giant shockwave that like blows her whole like ponytail backwards and stuff. So they do a great job of really emphasizing all the weird scale issues that she has. Then she meets the witch, gets turned into a real girl, and goes to the school. This is where she, you get a great little pun where she has to come up with her own name. And so the name she comes up with is Natsuno Ramune, which if you translated that literally into Japanese, ignoring the kanji, it would just be Summer Ramune. It's like Ramune in summer, basically. And then you have all the gags you're kind of alluding to earlier where she's having to try to move around the school, but isn't used to not being able to fly. And so one of the biggest laughs, I think, of the whole show is her just jumping out of the window when he says, like, oh, we have to move for our next classroom. It's down on the second floor. She's like, okay, I'll meet you there. She just goes, opens up the window, casually jumps out, and Haruhiko just turns around and freaks out because she just leaped out the window, seemingly to her death.
Yes, I just love the idea, because this is like, for Haruhiko, this is just a normal day where he is trying to be a nice boy helping the new girl, and she just seemingly commits suicide in front of him. I also love that she just is not used to paying attention in class, so she keeps falling asleep, and then at one point she just gets up and tries to walk away because she's bored. It's great.
Yeah, so well, I've had to deal with that with the student every now and then. It's like, no, you.
I used to be that student, so I feel for her.
Well, specifically you don't just get to leave. Like that's just not a thing you can do. Like, I'm sorry, you're a minor. Like you have to be here. I'm sorry. It's like yes. you just don't get to walk away. They then go to the fireworks festival, and the witch meets this other adorable little phantom. That's a little fireworks phantom, which is cute. And you have all these moments of them going around the festival. And then that leads into the whole giant climax where the fireworks phantom wished to be able to go out with a bang, basically with his wish, yes. Which is that's pretty dramatic. And so they all have to fight him. You have this big action sequence. And of course, because he's flying in the air, nobody can deal with him other than Lulu. So Lulu exposes that that's who she really is. In a Cinderella-like fashion, she turns back into her little form because she wants to go save Haruhiko, but it's captured by the Phantom. And this is where you get the other best gag, which is it blowing up and then her face being there in the sky, her winking faces. Haruhiko weeps. It's the reason why this is so good, this gag, because this gag has been done in a million different shows. It is not original. Like in this specific thing of the character's seemingly dead, and we look up into the sky, and their like face appears. I mean, like this isn't even the first time KyoAni has done this, because while it wasn't a character death, this is the same thing that happens in Nichijou when the crow leaves, and the crow flies off and makes the trail and says, "See you again," and he flies off, and Hakase and Nano look up into the sky and say goodbye to the crow, and the crow appears in the sky, right? It's like a classic sort of anime gag. The reason it's so good here is they play it up so much. The music is incredibly dramatic. The shots of Haruhiko who like collapses to his knees in the ocean, and then looks up and like it explodes and he reaches up and then falls back down. Like, it's so good. Like, these are shots that look like they could be in, like, the end of the fucking Violet Evergarden movie. I know we haven't seen that yet for this podcast, but when we get there, you will know what I'm talking about. That there's a very dramatic scene of characters standing in an ocean, and it's like they play this with that level of gravitas, and they just push it so far. It's great. It is the best version of this gag I have ever seen.
And it's that the image of her winking in the sky comes in the middle of the scene with that level of gravitas.
Yes.
Where you just mix this absolutely absurd image with that, because if you took that part of like her winking in the sky out of it, that image is like this incredibly dramatic, they've got like the curvature of the earth like down on the bottom because it's like this wide angle lens and there's all the fireworks in the sky and he's reaching out. Just compositionally, it is so dramatic, but it is with this incredible like gag in the middle of it. Oh, I love it. I love it so much.
It's so, so funny. And then you get the end of the episode, which is also incredibly touching. She does get to drink a whole, I think it's like a small bottle of ramen, but she does get a whole bottle of ramen and her belly is like massive. And then there's this incredibly adorable moment where Haruhiko tells her, like, I'm sorry for stepping on you in the morning, and like he kind of realizes he takes her for granted. And then she steps on his fingernail and says, like, now we're even. And that is like the cutest fucking thing in the world. It's such a great little moment of showing like the friendship between these two people and how much, they fight each other, but it's because they're like siblings, and it's just a fun little moment of them kind of like realizing how much they mean to each other. It's a really well done little story that has a bunch of fantastic gags in it.
I agree. And I think, also I didn't realize this while I was watching it because I didn't know what was coming. But when you look back on it, the structure of these last 4 episodes is really tight and really smart to have episode 10 be about Lulu and like her relationship with Haruhiko and how special it is, even if he takes it for granted. Episode 11, which we're about to talk about, being about him as a child and lacking a mother, lacking parents, and sort of that gap in his life. And then 12 and 13 tie all of that together. It makes the show have more cumulative power than you think it's going to. Because even watching 10 and 11, they're great, but you don't necessarily think they're leading anywhere because that's not the kind of show this has been. But I think it's because they do it in this sequence that the final run of episodes, you get to the end and you're like, okay, this is actually kind of a great show. What the heck? This is awesome.
Yeah, and it's where I think you see how well done the show is, that like, while each episode does really stand on its own, right? And they are very episodic stories with like a kind of like open and shut plot line, that there is a clear undercurrent that they are building on. It's not like Isao Tatsuya is a fantastic director, right? He's not a fool that doesn't know what he's doing. He clearly has a strong vision of what the overall ideas that the show is concerned with are. These themes about family, about perception, about friends, like perception of both yourself and the people around you, right? And he's developing those ideas through these individual episodes and plotting those out, and they are building on each other, so they have a cumulative effect. So by the time you get to the end here, like, this episode 11, like, it's not just, it's paying off some of what you had in the previous episode with Lulu. It's also paying off stuff that was established in episode 3 with Mai. And so it's like, and then, periodically through the other episodes, you get these bits and pieces about Haruhiko's past, that his mother left him, he's estranged from his father as well, like all that stuff. It's, those ideas are seeded through the show in a very small way that once you start getting to the last couple episodes, it does have some meaningful material to pay off, which is why the show is so good. It's not, just that like the individual episodes are fun. It is that it still has a clear vision of what the overall show is saying. It's not just a bunch of random episodes thrown together. And so that's maybe like, I think a thing that a lot of people maybe miss or take for granted about these kinds of shows is that, just because it's episodic and doesn't have a strong serialized plot line doesn't mean that there's no connective tissue or there are no ideas being developed across the whole series. There still are. They're just developed in a different way.
Yes. All right. Episode 11, another Ishidate Taichi. I think this is the best one of the series. This is the one that, like, even after seeing the first 10 episodes, I did not know this show had this episode in it. This surprised me that this show had an episode that I think had this level of pathos to it, and sweetness, and I think emotional intelligence, even as there had been ones that are very good on that level before. There is episode 4, the other Ishidate one. There is the Care Bears one, episode 6. Mm-hmm. But like, I still think this one kind of blew me back a little bit because it is such a sweet episode about the emotional reality of these characters. And particularly the ending of the audience and then Mai realizing what it was that turned Haruhiko into a little kid, which is this essay he wrote where he lies about this happy summer he had with his family, which he didn't really have. I was really shocked. This feels like this could be right at home in one of the key shows or, some of the other KyoAni masterpieces. And it was really surprising to see it here and for it to feel as natural as it does, slotted in next to a bunch of, a lot of zany silliness.
Yeah, I agree with you that this is the best episode. There's just a lot of things that it does so well. One is, I think, just the procedure of the first half of the episode of them developing the mystery. It's real, like, kind of meat and potatoes, nuts and bolts stuff, but it's so well done. Of Haruhiko, he sees this essay. You don't hear him read it out loud, but you see him read it, so you don't know what the content of the essay was. And then the next morning, he wakes up and he's a little kid. But at first you don't fully realize, like, does he know what's happening? Is he have his memories as an adult? Like, what's exactly happened here? Is he just shrunk? And then it's not until he goes to the school and he opens up this door to the school and he says, "Hey everyone, I'm here," and then does the reverse shot and it's a bunch of other little kids at a kindergarten, and you realize, oh shit, like, it's not just that he shrunk, like literally he's reverted to who he was as like a 10-year-old boy or something, however old he's supposed to be. And I think that, like, whole process and the slow reveal. Then Kurumi, who of course goes to that school because the elementary school is attached to the high school. She's there. She sees him, helps him. This is also where you get just like such good little pieces of writing where Kurumi, because she's older than this version of young Haruhiko, you see a very different side of her where she's kind of trying to help him and be a little bit of like a big sister kind of character to him. She then sort of puts it together after she sees the bag and everything, that this is their Haruhiko, and then hooks them back up with the characters from the high school. And I think that whole sequence of events, it's just so nicely plotted and written out to let you enjoy the mystery and see the process. And it feels so natural that you take the different elements of things we already know about, like Kurumi, where Haruhiko would have gone to school, and let that sort of naturally develop and follow through to, okay, now we have all of our characters together and we have to figure out what to do with Haruhiko.
Absolutely. It's one of the best reasons to have Kurumi in this show is to make this whole plot line work. And as you say, have her, but now from a very different vantage where our main character suddenly is like tabula rasa, knows nothing. And so Kurumi, who was the newest, youngest member of the gang, is kind of the expert helping him out for a little bit there. It's a very nice dynamic, which then leads to some high comedy and eventually some high pathos in Mai deciding that he cannot live on his own and he has to come with her. And we get the great scenes of like them grocery shopping and all of that. It's so good. And him like he tries to buy like 6 books because he doesn't know what he's going to do with his free time. I love all that.
And one thing I didn't know on first watch, because I didn't remember any of the stuff of like where Lulu comes from the last episode. And so when I was going back through to get some screenshots, the book he is buying, or like the top book on the stack, is, I'm not sure exactly what story it is, but it looks like it's like an Arabian Nights kind of thing that has a Lulu-esque character on the cover, which is a nice detail. It's not the same children's book because it's like an adult book, but it's a nice little like kind of thing that's foreshadowing a little bit of the Lulu reveal in the next episode. And you just get all these fun gags. Like, I love little kid Haruhiko so much. He's such a little shit. where he's so snobbish because he's this kind of precocious child. There's a great joke where he says something that's like, oh, well, it's better than waking up as a bug. And everyone looks at him and is like, what are you talking about? And he's like, what are you, just like, oh, it's Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis. What, you're a high schooler and you haven't even read it? It's like, you little fucker. Yeah, it's like all that stuff, and the writing is so good, where it feels so natural that this is who Haruhiko would have been, that he would have been this little smart aleck little kid, and that, he's kind of, he's doing it partially to get attention, right? And he's kind of grown out of that. And he's more of this kind of like lonely boy now as a teenager who sort of like is kind of hiding all that stuff and wrapping it up inside. This is all of that getting just exposed to everybody. Yeah, you just have all these great little bits of them trying to connect. That then leads into, to me, like the big centerpiece scene of this episode, which is them in Mai's bedroom, where the rainstorm happens, and that's where Mai makes this like real connection with Haruhiko, where I think she fully now sees him as the kind of inner child of this boy that she likes, that this little kid is, and she also sees a lot of herself in him. And so it makes this little connection, starts treating him like a little kid, and accepts this slightly more kind of mothering role in that dynamic. And the way that whole scene is played and written and shot and voice acted, it's just absolutely fantastic.
It's so good, you almost forget the intense Freudian dynamics of what's going on, which is there throughout this whole show, and the show puts a hat on it by, mentioning Freud and Jung by name multiple times. But yes, no, it's very good. There's also the scene right before that where they're at school and they're trying to figure out how to get him to grow up, and they give him one of the porno mags, and his face goes all red seeing what's inside. That's a pretty great moment.
Yes, it is a good, because also I love the writing on it, where it says at the top, it's like the biggest cup size of this century appears, big breasted idol Yudidun the photo collection, and that's what they give him. And on the spine it just says big boob idol basically, and and his mind explodes from looking at this, which is fantastic.
Then you have the final scene at the park, where we have this phantom who shows up because a cat shits in its sandbox.
It pees on him because it's a sandbox, so it pees in the sandbox. So the whole time while this really dramatic scene is happening, this is kind of Myriad Colors Phantom World in a nutshell, of it playing with the comedy of the drama. You have this very dramatic dynamic between Haruhiko and Mai, and in the background the whole time the Phantom's just going, oh god, cat piss, oh it smells so bad, oh cat piss is awful. He's just going on and on and on about it. And it's like, I feel really bad for him, because I'm like, yeah, I mean, I'd be really upset if a cat took a piss on me too. It's like, yes. I'd be throwing a fit if a cat just pissed all over me. I'm like, this is just, it's sticky, it's the worst. God, this is terrible.
Yes, because the other thing going on in that whole scene is that her taking him to the park is this thing that we later learn he had written about in his essay that he was lying about, because he didn't actually have a family to take him to the park. So it's this idyllic day for him that then, because of this one cat pissing in the wrong place, has this phantom come out. And again, the phantom's not really being evil or anything. This phantom, honestly, his motivations for throwing a fit are very understandable, as you were just saying. But it swallows up Mai, and then Haruhiko suddenly becomes an adult again, because his fantasy makes it sound sexual. His dream, about having a family moment was fulfilled. But of course he is in these small little boy underwear because all the other clothes are ripped off of him.
Yes, and then Cthulhu comes out and covers it up with a tentacle, which is set up for payoff that is also in the OVA, which I appreciate.
Yes. I do like that Cthulhu's main role in Haruhiko's life is to cover up his junk. That is the main thing this god that he summons comes out and does. It's great.
Yeah. And then you have this very touching scene at the end where Mai gives Haruhiko this magazine that she had bought for him to give him his little kid, which is this adorable little kid magazine that's learn how to draw phantoms, and all this stuff.
The title of the magazine is literally Tomodachi. It's friends.
Yes. And I love that there's some stuff here in the staging where they have Mai is in this dress we've never seen her in before, that is this very kind of motherly dress. Again, they're sort of there's a lot going on here with the kind of the mother roles and the pseudo mother figures in Haruhiko's life. But I think also kind of Mai seeing this nurturing side to herself that I think she had never really kind of realized was there. And then she reads that essay There's this beautiful little shot of where she puts the letter of the essay down on the magazine that's also has the milk chocolate box that had all of Haruhiko's treasures as a little kid in, including this essay, and then also one of his modern kind of sketchbooks. And then she goes back out into the kind of living room area and hangs out with all of them as they're all chatting. And also, because the other dynamic here is that Haruhiko does not remember any of this. So, like, Mai's whole connection she built up with that, like, he does not have any of those specific memories. And I think there's something, like, kind of bittersweet about that. And I think it's also playing into the kind of motherly thing as well, the sense of, like, oh, like, when they grow up and leave, like, they don't remember all those, like, little moments maybe that, like, you as a parent had, like, developed and treasured and cultivated, and, like, they've kind of grown up and left. I don't know, there's, like, a lot of complicated stuff, I think, emotionally packed into the last minute of this episode, where it's piling a lot of things on top of each other, like, symbolically and thematically.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I was... As much as I liked the show through its first 10 episodes, and again, the ones leading up to this are fantastic, I do think this ratchets to a level of character depth that I was surprised to see this show go to. Yeah. And then the 2-part finale, which is just a great close to this kind of show, like a real object lesson in how to do a nice cumulative finale to a very episodic series. That this is in itself still episodic. This is a 2-parter, but it is its own little plot line with the Enigma character and all of that. But it all wraps up in a way that makes it feel like you went on a journey with these characters through all these disconnected episodic, one-offs. And honestly, it's the kind of finale that I think nails the landing so well. I think my opinion of the show raised pretty significantly just from these last 2 episodes.
Yeah, they're very good. In particular, I think the first half is the kind of like the more interesting. The final episode is still good, but it doesn't get as, like, I think, of much juicy stuff because it has to be a bit more actiony. No. Because, episode 12 has just so much great stuff in it. One, just Enigma as a character, I love. She's voiced by Nakahara Mai, who is Nagisa in Clannad, which this is, what a different character that is.
Yes.
Nagisa would have had to take a real weird turn in life to end up like this. But yeah, so you have Enigma, who's going around attacking people and stealing their powers by smooching them, which is a good little touch there. And this obviously leads into the big, like, centerpiece of this episode, which is Enigma disguising herself as Haruhiko's mother, which you don't realize until the end of the episode, but sort of like reconnecting with Haruhiko and him struggling with this thing that, again, has been in the background the whole time. I think this is what makes this finale stuff so good, is all the time we have been thinking about families, whether it's Haruhiko or the other characters. It's been such a sort of like constant element, and Haruhiko in the background has clearly been missing this kind of mother figure, and he's been finding surrogates of that with Mai and Lulu. Again, this is also the episode that pairs the opening shot of the first episode where Lulu pries open his eyes with his eyes opening up from the same perspective, but seeing the mother there. So again, they're like really conflating some of these characters together, but now it's the actual mother seemingly coming here to be there for him, but it's not really the actual mother. It is this idealized version of his mother, the mother that he wants to have, that comes back into his life to be this kind of perfect figure. That then, of course, he has to realize that that is not a thing, that he is being deceived, that he is like, his need for that motherly affection and attachment is allowing him to be manipulated, and then it comes apart in the most Freudian thing that has happened in anime I've seen in quite a while, where his mother, again, it's not actually his mother, it's Enigma, but Enigma is possessing his mother's body. So it's not that Enigma has shapeshifted Mystique-like, it is the mom's body. So Haruhiko kisses his mom. Like, it's a whole thing. It's a very Freudian thing.
And the kiss specifically, it's not just a kiss, it's this kiss that saps him of his powers.
Yes.
And leaves him knocked out, and then her body is abandoned by Enigma. Yes, extraordinarily Freudian. Another couple of fun things that I wanted to note in this episode that I really loved is it has one of my favorite openings in terms of, like, Haruhiko's, lecture he gives us, which culminates in them talking about like fairy tales and folk tales and all these stories that are like parts of the subconscious, and them theorizing maybe phantoms come from these. And then he and Lulu are both holding up like of these books, and they're like, and because they're not copyrighted, we can use as many of them as we want, which is just such a great little moment. KyoAni doesn't do like fourth wall breaks like that much, but that one made me laugh very hard. I love that opening. There's also a scene where the rest of the gang, not Haruhiko, but the rest of them are out, and they're fighting this sunflower phantom, and they're having trouble with it until they realize a sunflower only can face the sun, so they just go behind it and kick its ass.
Yeah, that's an incredibly funny gag of them just realizing, oh, wait, he's a sunflower. His weakness is he can only see the sun. And yes, the next shot is them just standing behind him, and he's desperately trying to turn around and can't do it. Then Mike just kicks him in the back of the head. I felt bad for him. All he wanted to do was, I don't know, shoot sunflower seeds all over the place. I'm not sure what he was doing.
There was some line about him messing up something at the school, and it's fine, but it was cute.
Yes.
Yes.
But yeah, man, the ending of this episode, there's just a lot packed in there, mother horror, identification of like, because you have that whole shot where like the mom, where Enigma like sprouts out of the mom's back and she collapses, and then Enigma is standing there in the same pose the mom was. And of course, Enigma sort of does resemble his mom, but in this very kind of seductive way. It's like, man, there's just, they're cooking with some stuff on this episode with that. And
is the mom just the same voice actress when she's separate from Enigma? I think so, right?
Oh, I actually don't know. I did not look that up. I think so, but I'm not sure.
Because that's a whole other layer, of course, to the multiplicity of Enigma and of the mother figure and all of that. Yeah. And, I don't think like this adds up to the most deep Freudian reading you will ever see in a movie or a TV show or anything. But I think it's smart, and I think it's smart in the specific way of like some actual psychoanalytic applicability rather than just kind of pie in the sky thinking about things, because it is about a character who on a fundamental level grew up without a mother figure in his life and doesn't know how to feel about that, and hangs out with a bunch of women all the time and doesn't quite know how to feel about that either. And so I think on that level, it is a good use of the Freudian archetypes.
Yeah, and I think there's some amount of the, like, his mom left to be with another man, and, like, so there's a dynamic there that I think makes it feel, that it's not just playing on the psychoanalytics of it for fun or whatever, just, like, not thinking about it. It is, I think, like trying to apply some of those things in a way that makes sense for the character we have met and the very specific kinds of insecurities that he has created these things in his life to try to cope with it, right? Because that's the other thing where you have Lulu who gets conflated in all of this. And so when this happens to Haruhiko, Lulu also collapses and then ultimately kind of reverts into this character that's much more similar to little kid Haruhiko that we had in the previous episode. And so there's this sense of Lulu representing some of his own kind of like this imaginary friend character that is partially a replacement for his mother, but can't really be, but is also just kind of like another facet of Haruhiko's own personality. And yeah, these are not things that I think like, I'm not interested in sitting down and doing a reading of like, oh, let's untangle and explain all of this stuff and find one-for-ones. It's more that I think the show is smart in picking a specific number of motifs and weaving those into the plots of the individual episodes to give this like stronger cumulative effect that gives us access, I think, into a deeper reading of the psychology of these characters than you would expect based on what you saw in episode 1. The show has a lot more going on to it than just being an episodic comedy. There's a lot more thought going into it, and that's what makes it so good.
Absolutely. And then I think we should talk about the Lulu reveal, which is what happens in episode 12, of that there's a bunch of like complicated metaphysics behind how they describe it, but she's essentially an imaginary friend, right?
Yes.
Like that is how you would describe it in a storytelling way that he created out of this sort of sense of isolation, but then she also is, and I liked this aspect that she is like his kind of bottled up silliness, basically, and his like lust for life, which we do see from him on occasion, but we also see how he is a little buttoned down. And I like that. And I like the whole analogy they draw at the end of her. Basically, they say like, well, just think of it as though you and her are twins, like, and you were separated at birth, and that sort of thing, which is very funny because then she immediately starts acting like she's the older sister, which is a weird way to think about it. But I like it, and I think it's a good version of that kind of imaginary friend story trope. I like how it ties back to all the books he read as a kid, and as soon as I saw like the magic carpet book that he has, the 1001 Arabian Nights sort of stories book, I'm like, oh, that's why Lulu looks that way. They were thinking about this the whole time.
Yes.
And it's cool.
Yeah, it's very good. Like, there's a bunch of stuff in the last episode I think that is fun. One thing I really like, this is kind of a weird thing, but I just find it very interesting. The character design for the guy that has married Haruhiko's mom, he's such a guy. Like, he's such a, like, everyone else looks like a, like, exaggerated anime character, and this is just like a dude. Like, he just looks like he's out of a different show, but I think very intentionally. That he feels like he's come from the real world here, and everybody else is living in their adolescent battle anime.
It's like, just because I can't stop making these comparisons today, in One Piece, all of the One Piece characters are weird cartoon characters, and then the military admirals are all based on classic Japanese actors and look like real human men. That's basically what you have here. He looks like a traced drawing of like an actual like dude who worked at KyoAni or something.
Yeah, he just has this very different look to him that I think plays into a lot of these themes and this like the complicated feelings that Haruhiko has about his mother that kind of come crashing down in a way when he actually like meets this other person that like, which what a complicated relationship you have to have, where because he's not really Haruhiko's stepfather or anything, because Haruhiko's completely estranged from his mother. So it's like this very weird, complicated relationship, but it does allow him to like sort of see that, okay, like despite everything, like his mother does care about him. And that Haruhiko can maybe like find a little bit more self-worth in himself, which I think is part of what like this whole story in the last episode is leading up to, is him learning to love himself, which is then, he kisses his own self in the form of Lulu effectively to be able to do that. Right. And I think like the way that they play with all these emotions is very effective here. They also have the fantastic gag. I know I already mentioned it, but I want to say it again, where the entire season, you've had these occasional like little bits where Haruhiko's been trying to fix the dumb little computer thing. And then Chuunibyo just coming up and being like, oh, but Albrecht can just do that. I don't know, he fixed my like teacher's computer. He's like, there's no way he can, that Albrecht can, and then Albrecht just like fixes it immediately. And there's this great shot where like a literal Looney Tunes, Haruhiko's eyeballs pop out of their fucking sockets as soon as that happens. It's so good.
It's wonderful. Albrecht, MVP of this fucking show. He's a superhero. And the whole final battle in the last half of the episode, spectacularly animated.
Yes.
I know we sound like a broken record talking about KyoAni having spectacular battle animation and stuff, but this is a really good one, particularly at the end when he kisses Lulu, and then they have all of the different monsters on each side, and that whole final exchange. This is another one where the director and storyboard was split, and it's Takamoto Yasuhiro directing and Ogo Ataichi storyboarding. And this is like the earlier episode we mentioned, episode 6. I can kind of understand why, just on a level of the complexity of how many places there are in the episodes, all of the battle scenes. There's a ton of different shit going on in this one. It's a very complicated finale.
Yeah, and I really enjoy the payoff of Haruhiko summoning Marcosius and Cthulhu, but instead of being little weird cartoon versions, it is like they look like the actual drawings from his sketchbook. That's a good payoff.
Yes, absolutely. Although I will always love little dog Marcosius because he rocks. I do think, like, and I said this earlier, I think it works great as an ending to this show. I also think, like, because of how the character has kind of worked through these issues, and all the characters have come out on the other side feeling more like three-dimensional figures with a real unit, I feel like it's building. It's not like there's a direct cliffhanger set up for a second season, but it does feel to me like, oh man, we just finished a great run of episodes setting up an even better second run, where now all these characters, I think, are in a more firm place as themselves. They understand themselves and their world better. It just feels like there's a lot of mileage left untapped at the end of this one. There's also all the kind of romance harem angle that they don't really get into in this season, but is kind of lingering there on the side. And I'm curious it'll never happen. It didn't happen at the time, obviously, what a second season of this would have looked like. I'm not saying the show is completely incomplete without it, but I did if there had been more episodes, I would have watched them. It feels like there should have been more.
Yeah, it would. Yeah, I kind of feel the same way of like, I don't absolutely need more episodes of Myriad Colors Phantom World, but it feels like compared to Love, Chuunibyo, and Other Delusions, where I like season 2, but season 1, I mean, it's
complete.
That's a totally complete show. That show does not need another season, and that's like the biggest issues that season 2 struggles with is the fact that season 1 was so good and told such a complete story. It's kind of hard to figure out exactly what do you do with the second season of that show. Whereas Myriad Colors Phantom World, because it's not as plot oriented, it feels like there's so much more stuff you could do. Like, you could make so many episodes of this show because the fundamental building blocks of it are incredibly elastic. You've got a good set of characters that are very memorable and very striking. And then you've got a setting that allows all these different kinds of stories that are varying levels of comedic to dramatic with lots of action and also lots of humor that also get into character background and psychology that you could, continue to introduce like guest characters like they did for a lot of these episodes and dig into those and have interesting other ideas for Phantoms. Yeah, there's absolutely a lot of space to do more. And it's a bummer that there isn't anymore. Although I'm glad that they didn't, do whatever volume 2 of the light novel is and have 2/3 of humanity get destroyed and God show up as a phantom. And like one other detail I remember reading was that Shosuke, the Sakaguchi Daisuke character, he loses an arm apparently at some point. Like, it gets very violent and edgy. And I'm glad that's not something that exists because I don't need that anime.
I agree. We did get one more episode.
Yes.
We get the OVA, and the OVA is one of the fucking silliest things in the whole show, and I love it to death.
Yeah, it's so ridiculous. Like, it's like the OVA is basically it's the other episode most similar to the Onsen episode with the monkeys.
Yes.
In that it is purely a comedy. And I like it because at first you think, okay, I've seen some shows like this. This is going to be your cheesecake OVA. This is going to be we don't have to air this on TV. We get a little bit more budget. We're going to go to the beach and we're going to have this ain't no TV beach episode. We have like spent a lot of time animating the bodies of these female characters to be, to do things that you couldn't do on TV. And it's like, and if you've watched Myriad Colors Phantom World, it's not actually going to do that because it's just not what the show is. But everything on the surface of it is it's going to be like that. And then the gag they do for that, and the whole episode is just exploring this one fundamental gag.
Yes.
Which is the monster shows up, and what it does is it makes everybody see like everyone else be censored. So like that their like private parts are covered by, at first it's just like almost kind of like bubble style censoring of
it's an actual like style of like porn that people do online of taking photos of like people and doing this like polka dot like bubble censoring that makes them look naked because of where you put the little bubbles and your face fills in, or your mind fills in the rest. And then later on it is actual like TV censor bars that you would get on like a broadcast.
Yes, and it's just that joke and all the characters kind of like freaking out about it. But one thing the show, like, it goes through incredible pains to like demonstrate is that none of them are actually naked. They're all wearing their swimsuits. It's just that it kind of looks like they're naked because of the perception that your mind fills in the blanks when just these specific areas of the body are covered up. And that's the whole episode. And it's like, what a great, in many ways, just like a parody or like a satire of this kind of OVA that other episodes or other shows would do for their like big cheesecake beach episodes on the OVA. It's so funny to me that they just go in so hard on this very ridiculous gag.
It's fantastic. It's, perfectly animated to do all of these jokes. You have the whole other side of the episode, which is like the Daisuke Sakaguchi character, rallying the other boys who are like ready to just let this reign because they can at least have the fantasy of the censored girls. And he's like, no, swimsuits are better than censor bars. And that is a very funny bit. And of course, the ending is that one character does get naked, and that is Haruhiko.
Yes.
Because his pants get left in the ocean, and as you wrote it in your notes, Sean, they defeat the Phantom, but everyone sees Haruhiko's little Phantom, which made me laugh when I saw that in your notes. I also love the joke that when all the people come out to the beach, Minase is in her bikini, but she has kept her big headphones on, which is funny. And then they immediately call it out because I think it's Kurumi asks her about it, and she's like, well, they're waterproof. And I just love her sheepish, like, admitting, like, yeah, it's stupid of me to wear my headphones in the ocean, but they're my safety blanket. But yes, they are at least waterproof, which I'm not sure she's even telling the truth about, based on the way she says it.
Yes. Yeah, that is a very good gag. And yeah, like, I just love, it's just those little pieces with Minase's character where you, like, where she's just a complete weirdo. It's just she's so quiet that you don't realize it most of the time.
Yes. This show kind of fucking rocks, Sean. I don't know. The more we talk about it, the more I like it. I think this is a really darn good show.
Yeah, it's a really good show. Again, like, it's not, it doesn't reach the heights of the best KyoAni things, but it's like, but it's not that far away from them either. And it's just, I'm so glad that we got to rewatch it, because it has been a thing that's kind of been stuck in my metaphorical craw for a long time, is this sense of, like, why do people not like this show? Like, I thought it was pretty good. I liked Myriad Colors Phantom World. Why does everyone rate it so low? And it's the kind of thing when you see people discuss KyoAni stuff online, this show only ever comes up as like a punching bag of like, oh, it's like, but not everything they make is good. I mean, they did make Myriad Colors Phantom World. I'm like, but that show is good, I mean, it's fine if you want to do that, but do that with Beyond the Boundary. I don't know. Like, that's more, even that show's not that bad, but it's more deserving of it than this.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Beyond the Boundary looks even worse after having seen this.
Yes.
But, like, yeah, this show rocks. There is... I do not usually go to Wikipedia to look up anime facts. I go there to see, like, the episode titles, because Wikipedia, is not as bad as people say, unless when you're looking at anything foreign language film related, including anime. The reception part of the page for Myriad Colors Phantom World, have you seen this, Sean?
Yes.
It is one quote from CBR, Comic Book Resources, which, if you are ever citing CBR for anything, you are doing it wrong, because they are a bullshit content mill that, honestly, if it were just a site publishing AI articles, might be better than what they actually fucking put out, because it is all wrong, all misinformation. Never read that fucking site. And so they have a terrible quote from whatever terrible critic writes there. And then it says, just kind of uncited, this led Kyoto Animation to produce Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid and Violet Evergarden. What? What happened to Sound Euphonium in the middle, for one, if you're just going to be listing off shows they made after this? But no, like, someone please fix that fucking Wikipedia page, because it's a complete bullshit reception tab.
Yes, no, that's like, yeah, it like, what do you mean this led to Kyoto Animation to produce Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid and Violet Evergarden? Like, one, what's the relationship between those two shows? Because, like, I mean, Violet Evergarden, I mean, sure, in the sense that that's the next show that they did from their, like, adapting novel contest thing. Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, that's the only other one that has as much kind of, like, cheesecakey sort of, like, bouncing boobs and that kind of stuff. Like, that's in that show. So it's sort of a spiritual successor. In some ways, Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid is a kind of half spiritual successor to Myriad Colors Phantom World, now that I think about it. Not entirely, but in bits and pieces. But it's not like a thing where I don't think that KyoAni thinks of this show as a failure like that. And I don't think that Jonah Welland of CBR.com knows one way or the fucking other.
Yes.
Yeah, because it's just a general frustration I have. I think it's one of the reasons why we do this podcast, is that a lot of anime criticism online, not all of it, but a lot of it, and particularly the more mainstream elements of it, is really poor, and it leans into really bad elements of the fan base. It's why websites like myanimelist.com have just dreadful fucking communities that elevate shows that are, fine, but are not the most remarkable shows in the world as being like the top best anime ever made, like Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. A good anime, but like, is Myriad Colors Phantom World better than Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood? Maybe. Like,
I wouldn't go that far.
They're not that far away in quality. Like, I mean, they're very different, so it's hard to measure. But, like, it's the kind of thing where I just feel frustrated when a show like this gets dismissed, because when you read the reviews, the main thing that people criticize is that, well, the plot hasn't developed. It's like, oh, well, they still haven't done anything with that computer terminal from episode 2. And it's like, if that's the main thing you're hinging your criticism on, like, what have you been watching? Like, what did you not have any takeaways from any of these episodes? Nothing stood out to you about episode 11 when he turns into a little kid? Like, nothing stands out to you about episode 4 where they go to the other world with Reina's subconscious and the bear family? Like, nothing stands out to you about episode 6 and all the stuff at the end of that episode with Kurumi regaining her self-confidence and embracing Albrecht and coming back into the world through the mirror and the reflection? Like, nothing stands out to you about the Cat Mansion episode and the crazy dream sequence and all that stuff? Like, is all that worthless because it didn't push forward an overarching plot line? It's just maddening to me that that's like the state that a lot of people treat these kinds of shows in, because it's not just Myriad Colors Phantom World. There are plenty of shows, and there's a show every year that comes out that gets dismissed because it's too episodic. And it really frustrates me. It's the same reason why, and this is a more extreme example, why like Endless 8 gets dismissed completely offhand as being, oh, it's all just the same thing. It's all just the same episode. It's like, no, there are other things to this than having the like plot move forward and being able to see like, things have changed. This is the next event we are going to see. Like, if that's all you want, just read the synopses for episodes on a Wikipedia page. Like, that's all you have to, if that's what you want, is to see the plot move forward and know what the next development in the events of the story are. You don't need to watch the fucking show to get that. And Myriad Colors Phantom World and its reception is one thing that makes me sort of come face to face with how frustratingly poor people's reception of really interesting media is.
Oh, and this is a huge problem and I think we're specifically talking about English language criticism right now.
Yes.
And this is just a huge problem outside of anime too, like the, dumbass culture online saying like, well, you shouldn't have sex scenes in movies because they don't advance the plot. Or like when The Last of Us, the TV show, aired, episode 3, If You Had a Brain in Your Head, was very obviously the best episode of that show, but there was a small contingent of people going, but it didn't have Joel and Ellie, and it didn't advance the main plot, so it was filler, technically. And those people are, frankly, too dumb to live. I don't actually know how they're able to get air into their lungs and then back out again, if that's their thought process. So this is a whole big thing. I'm curious, is this the same? Obviously, this show flopped in Japan in terms of commercial sales. Do you know anything about its critical reception over there, or what the fandom looks like on that side of the ocean?
It seems fairly middling. Like, it feels like the show just kind of went under most people's radar, especially after, I think episode 1 has that big crazy scene at the end that became, like, a big talking point. And then after that, like, it just kind of feels like it was, a show that didn't have an audience for it, because it's not what was popular, right? Like, I think if this show came out and it was the exact same show and it had just come out 5 years earlier, it would have been fucking huge. But it just missed the window for what this thing is.
Yes.
And yeah, I just don't think there was like an audience there. And it's so, it goes back to that thing. I think like Ishihara Tatsuya, I think, knew it when he was making the show. Like, when he said that quote, again, this is after episode 1, he says, perhaps we haven't found a way to present things differently to other works. The things that an audience can be interested in are limited. Like, I think he knew we haven't found a way to make our things stand out to a new audience that is going to come to this work, because they're making shows the same way they've always made them. And so it's like, it's not a good recipe to make something very popular. But obviously for our interests, I don't particularly care what's popular. Like, I care in the sense of like, it's interesting cultural, like, knowledge and history stuff, but it's not important to me in terms of enjoying whatever the show is. Or Atomica Market wouldn't be one of my favorite things we have watched this entire season. All
right, and I think this is a general theme of this whole section of the podcast, this splendid isolation part, which is that other than season 1 of Love, Chuunibyo, and Other Delusions, none of these were particularly notable commercial successes, and some of them were pretty big commercial failures. And I think, while this is a much better show than Beyond the Boundary, I think it is similar in, like, it does not feel of a time with when it came out. And I do understand, and that's a perfectly valid reason to not necessarily be into a show. If it just doesn't feel like it's gelling with your taste or what you want to go watch at that point in time, go with God. That's fine. I would give this a shot if you like anything else KyoAni has made. This is, again, to be clear, this is not the first or second or fifth thing from this season we've done that I'm going to go sing from the rooftops people need to see. But I would still tell people they should watch it, especially if they like funny anime, if they like sweet anime, if they like anime that's very well animated. If they like something episodic but that is only 13 episodes instead of 100, there's lots of reasons to recommend this show.
Yeah, I would love for this show to get a second, a reevaluation, have people come back to it and kind of appreciate more of what it's doing, because it is very good. Obviously, we've had with like Tamako Market and Beyond the Boundary, we had the convenience of the 10-year anniversary being so recent that you could see a little bit of like, okay, Tamako Market clearly has lived on in the cultural memory more so than Beyond the Boundary because of how much more elaborate its 10-year anniversary thing is. I wonder if in a couple of years, when that time comes for Myriad Colors Phantom World, I wonder if there even is a 10-year anniversary. I hope there is. I hope there's something that comes out of this, like, I hope that, actors like Tadakota Azusa, who obviously like had a really big part in this role as Lulu, who is not necessarily, as sort of prominent a voice actress as someone like Heini Saudi, like, I hope that she looks back on this show and stuff like that very fondly, because I think all the people who worked on the show did such a good job that I would love for it to have a kind of cult fan base like something like a Tamako Market. Is this as good as Tamako Market? No. But it still deserves to have like people out there being like, you know what? Myriad Colors Phantom World, that's my shit. I like that show. I want there to be more people that are in that camp.
Well, we are definitely in that camp, so we'll be the first 2 members of the Myriad Colors Phantom World Appreciation Club.
Yes, if they do the 10-year anniversary, and I'll go to the movie theater and watch that. We're going to show all 13 episodes in the OVA in one giant marathon with no breaks, and they're just going to say fuck it, because they didn't make no movie for this. That's all you got to do. I was like, I'd go there just to go there.
All right. Well, Sean, we have 1 episode left in part 5 of season 4 of Japanimation Station. So why don't you tell us what we are watching next week for the mid-season part 5 finale of season 4? It's getting really complicated at this point.
It's getting very complicated. We are almost done with the part that was never meant to exist in the first place. Our weird little rest stop in the middle of our original plan for the Kyoto Vacation. But, we just saw a brochure and we saw it's like, if we just went off to the side a little bit, maybe we can just, maybe we can cancel our flight and get a flight a week later, and we can extend our stay at the hotel, because I'd really love to check these things out. And that's what we did. We got one last stop on that little detour. Next week, we are finishing this part by looking at the movie finale of Love, Chuunibyo, and Other Delusions, which is Love, Chuunibyo, and Other Delusions, Take On Me, which I can only assume is just a giant movie-length version of an adaptation of the music video of Take On Me by Aha.
独り立ち物語を紡ぐキャリアをテランで成功してした意地で何度もここのビルが潜れ